G'day mates, it's Busta here, and before the video begins, I would like to just give a shout out to Care Of for sponsoring this video. Care Of is a monthly subscription vitamin service that delivers completely personalized vitamins and supplement packs right to your door. And with the new year now upon us, you can make 2020 the year to prioritize you and commit to staying on top of your health. Instead of that laundry list of resolutions that you don't end up sticking with, Care Of can make taking your vitamins and supporting your health goals attainable. Care Of's fun online quiz makes it super easy too by asking you about your diet, health goals and lifestyle choices, and takes only 5 minutes to find out your personal scientifically backed vitamin and supplemental recommendations. It can actually be really hard to know what vitamins or supplements you should be taking, but Care Of makes it easy to find out what you specifically need to be at your healthiest. I actually took the quiz to see what signing up would be like, and it's really informative, user-friendly, and actually quite fun. Because my family and I had some of the worst luck last year with getting the flu constantly, my goal this year is to try and boost my immunity and regulate my sleeping patterns. So, to access Care Of, and for 50% off your first month of personalized Care Of vitamins, go to takecareof.com and enter BeScared50. That's go to takecareof.com and enter BESCARED 50. I do hope you guys take up Care Of on their generous offer, and without further ado, let's begin. This took place around 2 years ago. I was driving to work, a 5-hour drive. It was already dark. About 3 hours of driving, and I started to get tired, so I bought myself a coffee and some snacks at a gas station, and I went on. But snacks and coffee can only keep you awake for so long, and I started to feel tired again. This part of the road was nothing but thick, dark pinewood forest around me, no other cars on the road, nothing. Only insects smashing my windshield now and then, and an empty road. I was now extremely tired, and at one point I even nearly drove off the road, for almost falling asleep. I thought to myself that I have to sleep now, and I can't wait for a gas station. I need to stop as soon as I see a place where I can park my car, and just get something. When I'm tired too, I unfortunately fall asleep really fast. If I'm tired enough, I can fall asleep in the middle of a sentence even, when I'm talking, so it's a bit urgent for me to find a place where I can stop now. It felt like maybe an hour, but probably just like 5 minutes go by and I spot this little pocket in the road. It's like a parking space for quick stops, like peeing, switching drivers, or stuff like that, not even a real resting area. But I stopped here, turned down my windows to check if I heard any weird noises, and there was total silence. So I wound up my windows again. I thought to myself that nothing bad was going to happen. I haven't seen a car for like 30 minutes, in fact. The road is empty. And if someone is checking out my car, I bet it's the cops checking on me if I'm alright. So I leave my keys in the ignition and I lock the doors just to be safe. I adjust my seatbelt to make it more comfortable to sleep in, and I take off my shoes and I put them on the passenger seat on the right. And let me tell you that it was so nice to close my eyes, and instantly I fall asleep. I don't know why, but something wakes me up. I can't really see anything. Some kind of bright light hits me in the eyes. At first I thought that it was a flashlight, but then I realized it was the high beams from another car in my rearview mirror that was blinding me. I look at my left mirror and I see a dude walking up beside my car. Maybe he wants help with something? Should I make it clear to him that I'm in here? He's right beside my left back door now. Should I step out and ask what he's doing? I didn't have to in the end, because the dude proceeds to jerk and pull on my left back door. I almost crapped my pants when I realized that he's trying to force his way into my car. My seat is adjusted for me to lay down, and I push it back max. I can't reach the pedals, which makes it impossible for me to drive my car. But I slam the car horn, and it breaks the silence with a roar, and the dude jumps. And that gives me like 2 seconds to push my seat to reach the pedals, but it's still way out of adjustment, so I'm kind of pulling myself to the steering wheel because my seat is laying flat and isn't supporting my back. But anyway, I quickly start my car and I drive off, with a cloud of smoke from my screeching tires. It's actually quite surprising just how hard it is driving a car with nothing holding up your upper body, but I managed and I got out of there. As I leave, though, I look in the rearview mirror and I see how the dude stands there and just looks at me. And then I see two more guys coming up beside him. What I can make out, too, from the silhouette of their beams was that one of them has something in his hand, like a wrench or a crowbar or something. After that, I drove super fast, way over the speed limit. My whole body was trembling with adrenaline and fear, and I drove like that for like 30 minutes. Then I stopped at the gas station to fix my seat and put my shoes on again. I figured out, too, that I must have been only sleeping for like 10 minutes max. And well, after that, I didn't have to sleep until I got to my destination, which is surrounded by heavy-duty fencing, and the building has an alarm. I told my boss the next day as well, and he said that they actually have problems with what we call it in Sweden, road pirates. Criminals that force you to stop on the road and rob you of everything, including your car sometimes. And apparently, that specific area is known for it. I'm not saying that it was that. I mean, it could have just been three nice guys that wanted to check if I was okay. But then, why didn't they just knock on my driver's window? The thing in his hand could have just been a big flashlight, I suppose, but still, I think I dodged a bullet with that one. This story takes place during my senior year of high school when I still lived at home with my mum. It was a Saturday, so I slept in as any teenager does, and my mum, she left for work early that morning, so I spent my day at home alone. I decided to do some cleaning around the house when I realized that we were out of paper towels, so I went down to the garage to get them. That's where we kept extra things. My mum lives in a 3-story townhouse where the main floor is actually on the second floor, and the first floor is just a small entryway at the bottom of the stairs and 2 doors. One of them is the front door and the other leads to the garage. So I walked down the stairs and opened the door to the garage, going to flip on the lights, but realizing that I didn't need to, because the garage door was wide open and letting in a lot of daylight. Now, maybe to some this would be no big deal, but my mum lives in a not great part of town and is adamant about closing the garage door when she leaves. I remember feeling weird too about it, since it was so unusual, but chalked it up to my mum just not realizing it, or maybe something had rolled under the door, so the automatic sensor kept it from closing completely, and she drove away without realizing. I looked over into the dark corner of the garage where the boxes were stacked and the paper towels were stored. For some reason, I couldn't get myself to walk over there and grab them. I do have a slight fear of the dark, so I figured that that was what was causing my sudden hesitation. So I just kind of stood there in the doorway and pressed the garage door button on the wall and watched it close completely. I made sure nothing blocked it from closing, and I waited a good 10 seconds before leaving to make sure that it was really shut this time. I switched off the light, walked back inside, and locked the garage door. I took maybe 2 steps up the stairs before I heard boxes trembling and scuffling of feet, and the audible sound of someone hitting their hand against the garage door opener, and then the mechanical sound of the garage door opening. And at that, I noped it up the rest of the flight of stairs, then just stood at the top step for probably 20 minutes, just kind of shaking. It wasn't until my mum got home asking me why the garage door was open that I went back down there. And, other than my mum's car now in the garage, it was completely empty, except for the boxes in the corner where we store extra things for the house. I looked and saw that the boxes were toppled over. I had to explain to my mum the situation, and I'm so glad that my gut told me not to go into that dark corner of my garage, and to whoever decided to creep in there, please, never come back. I have a handful of little encounters that I just can't explain, starting from when I was around 7. So, the earliest one I can remember is waking up in the middle of the night and seeing a rapidly fading hand on my shoulder. I remember feeling something heavy on my shoulder, and when I turned around, I saw the faint image of a hand resting on my shoulder as though someone was actually standing behind me. even though I was laying on my back. I turned my bedside lamp on and I sat up staring around my room for a long time before eventually just falling asleep with the light on. The next one was about a year or so later, I think. Maybe more, I can't be sure, but I was lying in bed trying to sleep and I remember feeling something tugging at my blanket from the foot of my bed. It was hard enough too that I kept sitting up and turning my lamp on to see if anyone was there. I even looked under my bed at one point. After I'd sat up for about half an hour staring at the end of my bed, I laid back down and as soon as I did, as I turned the light off, I felt the tug again. I woke my dad up and he slept in my bed that night while I slept next to my mum, and he said that he slept fine. The next one, nothing physically happened, but for some reason I just couldn't shake the feeling like I felt like someone was in my room. The room just seemed small and dense and crowded, even though I was the only one in it. It bothered me enough too that I told my mum and she smudged my room and sat with me for a while. The next was about a week after that. It was a warm night, so I had my window open and I woke up and there were just a lot of flies in my room, so I got up and closed my window. And when I sat back on my bed, the window was a little bit open again. I stared at it in case it moved again, and it actually started to move open again on its own. It moved up another inch or so by itself, and at that point, I ran out of my room and slept next to my parents. After that one too, things started to pick up a little. I had a big plush wolf that my brother actually won at a fair at one point, and it sat in my room against the wall farthest from my bed, a good 6 feet or so away. I woke up one morning at dawn, and the wolf was now at the foot of my bed. When I was laying down too, I could just see its beady little eyes poking over the top of the quilt, and I still don't know how it moved across my room like that, but it scared me so bad that my mum gave it to Goodwill that afternoon because she just refused to have it in the house. Another time too, I was sleeping on the couch in the living room while my mum was busy with something. I slept there for 3 days, and every night I would feel someone walking past me. I pretended to be asleep, but I narrowly opened my eyes and could never see anyone, even though I'm sure that I could feel someone there. But one night, the video recorder kept turning on by itself too, and I'd turn it back off and it would turn back on again. But the last thing I encountered was another sleep one, and it was when I was about 19. I still remember the dream too, because I was walking home from my elementary school and was being followed by someone, but they were always just too far away to make out any features. I made it back to my house and nobody was home. In my dream, I laid down on the couch and then the whole house was just engulfed in flames, and the guy who followed me home was standing in the fire. I woke up really abruptly to this, and I saw the head and shoulders of an oldish man standing over my bed. It took maybe 15 seconds or so before it faded, but it was vivid enough that I actually said, "Who's there?" out loud. I know that it wasn't sleep paralysis too, because I could definitely move. Nothing ever happened after that, and I've moved out now. A few years after I moved out, though, they pulled up the carpet in my brother's room and found what looked like the ruins of a wine cellar under a trapdoor in the floor. But it had a little box of curious things from the 50s and the 60s in it, and some scraps of comic strips like it was used as a cubby at some point. Anyway, I never found any more information on it, but I'll never forget those nights that I was living there. So I used to live in the southwest corner of Missouri in an old railroad town that had quite a few missing people here and there, mostly due to a high tweaker population. I lived in what we called a holler, at the bottom of the tops of 2 enormous hills. A creek also ran through the holler, but was mostly dry throughout the year. Despite it being dry, though, living in what was basically a ravine makes the land and the hills damp and also misty, which meant that the woods surrounding our trailer were perpetually green year-round and also thick. You could walk in one direction for 10 minutes and get lost pretty easily. Generally speaking, we kids used the creek bed for a path, as there were flat rocks along it that were easier to navigate than the viney, lush forest floor. Now, one day in the middle of summer, I decided to go for a walk in the woods. As usual, our red-nosed pit bull, Fatty, came along, and The sun would be setting soon, but I was home alone a lot of that time, so there was no one around to tell me not to go. I figured that I had enough time before sunset to walk a certain point and back. It was 7:30 and the sun set around 9 at that point in the summer. But the minute that I started trekking it throughout the creek bed, my pit bull started whining really weirdly. He didn't leave my side once, but was definitely reluctant to follow, stopping here and there to smell the air, looking behind us. And I figured that maybe there was an animal in the area, so I didn't worry too much. There was a point in the creek bed, though, that I had to duck under 2 fallen trees. It made a sort of bridge in the middle of the creek and acted as a turnaround point for most of my walks. My dog was still whining, and I began to wonder if there was a cougar or even a bear in the area, but for some reason I wanted to just keep walking. I ducked under the trees, shushed Fatty, and stopped to listen to the woods surrounding us. I heard nothing. I heard literally nothing. No wind, no snapping twigs, not even any birds, which was kind of weird. Even on calm days with no wind, those woods were usually teeming with sounds of life. And nothing was ever still, but all of a sudden, now it was. It also made my stomach feel like I was dropping down into a pit. Then I began to feel really weird. I can't really describe it, but it was kind of a gut feeling, when suddenly my body felt very queasy and oversensitive. And worse, I had the distinct feeling that now I was being watched. I have felt similar feelings when being watched by a bear at some point, and it's always really weird, but something just tells you to get the hell out of Dodge when there's a huge animal nearby. Humans are animals after all, and we also get those instincts. And every time that I'd experienced an animal that could potentially hurt me in the woods, I'd immediately turned around and gone home. My dog had always alerted me by barking or growling, but for some reason, not this time. Instead, Fatty was scared and trembling. Now, I'd seen this dog get hit by a truck before and get up like nothing had happened, and this time he was terrified. All signs were pointing to leaving, right? But no, another weird thing happened. Call it an edgy teenager or anything you want, but I felt this strange pull into the woods. There was no sound, but I felt like something was calling me, luring me deeper into the woods. It was the worst part of that day, and also the creepiest thing that I'd ever felt. But I was also curious, so I wanted to know what the hell wanted me to wander further ahead. I walked forward, aware that my dog had firmly planted himself at the fallen trees. He was shaking all over and yelped at me as I walked away, but he didn't come with me. He also didn't leave, which I believe potentially saved my ass that day. But I left Fatty behind and eventually got to the part of the creek that I'd never been to. It was a clearing with a ring of trees surrounding it, with the creek stretching far ahead and going around an unseen corner. The sun hadn't moved and it was still silent. I stood in place for maybe a minute, I think, and considered turning around. The clearing was creepy and felt kind of devoid of everything. I can't really explain it well enough, but I felt like if I walked around that corner, which was about 100 feet away, that something terrible was about to happen. It felt like something was just waiting for me to walk into it, unsuspecting. In the end, I brushed it off as paranoia. I had plenty of sunlight left, and I could explore alone for once, and besides, if something was drawing me further in, then it's also possible that I might find something amazing. So I took a couple of more steps, and suddenly, I heard my dog yelping frantically behind me. Startled, I turned around quickly, my dog looking like a little white speck far back into the trees. He was pacing back and forth at his spot and barking like it was going to kill him if he didn't take off running. He kept lunging forward, but wouldn't move any distance forward. That was when I realized that something was just very wrong. I turned around again to look back at the clearing, and all of a sudden, it was pitch black outside. Like seconds ago, the sun wasn't even close to going down below the horizon, and all of a sudden, now the stars were out. No sun, no light. I stared hard at the trees around the corner, seeing nothing but elongated shadows. I heard a twig snap when all of a sudden my ears just started to ring, and panic flooded my entire body. I whipped around and shot back towards the fallen trees, sprinting towards my dog. He was snarling and barking like mad, and when I ducked under the trees, both of us sprinted back towards the house. The entire time, I honestly felt like death was on my heels, and Fatty never once ran ahead of me, staying right at my side the entire way back. When we eventually made it back home, I quickly checked the clock, and during the walk that usually took about 10 minutes, I would say, I had been gone for 3 hours. I had left my home at 7:30, and now it was 10:30, which meant that my parents were due home in an hour. The next day, I walked only part way back to where I could see the clearing. The very farthest that I could walk was about 2 miles, and so that meant that it took me 3 hours to walk there and back. To this day, I have never felt so proud upon in the woods as well. These woods weren't part of a national park or anything, but if you walked about 10 miles or so, you could reach Mark Twain National Park. And people go missing there quite often, seeing as the woods can be impossible to navigate after dark, and it has large hollows in the middle of the woods that people go rolling into, and they get stuck as well. I don't know what wanted me in that woods that day. I didn't see what it was, and it didn't say anything, but I ignored every natural instinct that I had to run until it was almost too late. My dog being there may have just been the reason, too, that I didn't wander deeper into the woods of the Missouri and succumb to someone or something in that dark place. I've never told anyone in my walking life about this, and what do you guys think? Have any of you guys heard of the 411 cases involving Missouri woods and hollers and whatnot? Or do any of you guys have any similar experiences if you're from this area? This happened a couple of months ago now, but when it first happened, given how crazy it was, it took me a few weeks to kind of collect myself enough to share this. It's also relevant for me to tell you up front that I'm a military veteran and I have PTSD and anxiety, as well as a pretty bad case of depression that I'm currently in my 3rd year of. I've read that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, can massively improve PTSD symptoms and in turn help to reduce anxiety, so I've been trying various techniques at home. The problem there is that my wife and I live in a small 2-bedroom, ground floor flat with an upstairs neighbor with absolutely no concept of other people. A jock douchebag type who's a personal trainer, but he trains at home to COS and gains and whatnot. The kind of guy whose only 2 topics of conversation are protein powder and steamed rice. And I'm sure that you can imagine the type. Anyway, with that being a constant issue, meditation and quiet mindfulness are just not possible with the constant noise. My solution to this was to just do my normal routine during the day, but take advantage of my insomnia later on at around 12 o'clock at night, I suppose, and I would put on my coat and my shoes, and as we live near the beach, I figured that I could walk to the beach now that it's pretty much no people around, walk on the sand, and just be mindful to the sounds of the ocean. Sounds nice, doesn't it? It was the first 2 times, but you know what they say, the 3rd time, it's a charm. So the walk to the beach from my home isn't that far, maybe a little over half a mile, but once I got there, I would walk to the very end of the beach, until you reach the cliffs where there's a World War II artillery gun turret, which was another half-mile-ish. Sometimes I would walk the path up the cliff to the gun and stare out into the blackness of the midnight ocean, which was only broken by the occasional flash of light from the lighthouse. I would sit and listen to the waves crashing against the cliffs. Sometimes I would use my eyes and just concentrate on nothing but that sound. I felt safe there, knowing that I was alone. It was just me and the ocean. Usually, before I would turn tail and head home, I would walk down to a small row of benches. They're all marked with plaques in remembrance of someone who also came and enjoyed the view, although I imagine that they came during the day. The benches, though, were close to an old pub that was shut down years ago, and I heard that the place used to get used as a dogging site or a brothel or something back in the day. So when I saw vehicle headlights coming towards the pub, I figured that it was some young lads trying to catch potential doggers at it. I sat at the bench and waited for the car to pass me, but as it rounded a bend in the road further up, I was momentarily lit up by the headlamps. The headlights of the vehicle went off immediately, and the car went off-road and out of sight for a moment. At this point, I was fully alert and a bit cautious, so I dropped to one knee and ducked behind the bench that I was sitting on. The vehicle drove past me, and it was only maybe 40 feet away from me, and as the lighthouse illuminated the vehicle, I could now see that it was an old beat-up Land Rover kind of vehicle, with shitty camo paint on the wings. At that moment, too, somebody popped out of the top of the vehicle with a scoped rifle and a big torch. In that instant, in my head, I was back in Iraq and my senses felt razor sharp. I dropped onto my belt buckle and I crawled onto a patch of long grass adjacent to the benches. Then I got in a position where I could see them, but they couldn't see me. The guy with the rifle shone his torch at the exact bench that I'd been sitting on, then the others searching for me. He started looking all around him through the scope, looking for where I might have gone. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt as if I could hear it. I held my sleeve over my mouth to muffle the sound of my breathing, but more importantly, to try and hide the condensation of my breath. The vehicle started to move to get a better view of the benches, so I started slowly crawling towards the main road, as not only is there a row of houses, but an old stone bus stop that I could take cover in if they saw me and opened fire. After about 5 minutes of hiding in the long grass, though, it started to rain, and they were all clearly looking for me, but were now about 150 feet away. The guy with the vehicle was scanning around with his eye down the scope, so I waited until he was looking away from me to seize my moment and run for cover. I pushed my hands hard into the wet dirt to launch myself onto my feet, and then I sprinted towards the bus stop while throwing some zigzags in there just in case they actually had seen me. Luckily, they hadn't, and I was now far enough away that I could take out my phone and call the police. They were there with a riot van and a squad car in about 10 minutes, and as I was talking to the officers in the van, they spotted the gunner's vehicle and took off after them. The officers in the squad car stayed behind to talk to me. The rain was coming down like sheets now, and they asked me if I was absolutely sure that it was a rifle, and I told them yes, that it was 100% a rifle. There was no doubt in my mind at all, but the officers looked at each other and then one of them asked, "And what exactly is your experience with firearms?" I told them that I was an ex-army and have seen my fair share of all kinds of firearms. They then asked me what I was doing there after midnight, which is a pretty fair question to be honest. I explained that, quite ironically, I was taking a mindfulness walk to ease my PTSD symptoms. They were satisfied with that explanation too, if not somewhat amused, and told me that the armed response unit was now en route. I asked if they needed me to stay behind and make a statement, but the officers told me not to bother waiting around because, well, they most likely wouldn't need to take a statement beyond the call that I made, and also, it was pissing down with rain, so I should get home and get dry. It was over, but I still felt super wired and my heart was still thumping hard in my chest. I started the walk home, and when I was about halfway there, a police helicopter buzzed overhead and settled over the area where I'd been sitting on the benches with the searchlight going. And it was right then that it hit me like a shotgun to the chest. That happened. That was real, and it was here. What the hell? My head started swimming, and my heart was pounding twice as hard now, and my legs felt like jelly, and my lungs felt glitchy, and I just couldn't breathe properly. I dropped to my knees, crying in the street in the pouring rain, the only light coming from a nearby street lamp with a flickering bulb. I was gasping for breath, thoughts flashing in my head, thinking that if I had stayed still, if I hadn't hunched behind the bench, if I'd done any number of things differently, or hadn't, then I could have gurgled my last breath alone in the dark in the cold wet dirt, and my wife would be none the wiser till the following day. I have no idea if they were even there for me, and if they were, how could they know that I'd be there? I'd been twice before, I suppose. It's not like there's animals to hunt there beyond foxes, but why hunt foxes from a vehicle with a rifle and a torch at midnight? Anyway, I'm not ashamed to say that that experience, it terrified me. I guess my army training helped me to stay alert and stay hidden, but I don't really know. I don't go walking at night anymore, and I have the occasional nightmare about the whole thing. But the next day I made a call to the local police to try and get an update on what happened. After a quick description of what the initial incident was, the officer on the phone, I assume that she was an officer anyway, was able to find the incident report right away. Basically, the first officers on the scene confirmed that they had seen the vehicle, and they'd gone off-road in pursuit. They said that they'd given chase over difficult terrain for as long as they were able to anyway. The vehicle then turned off all lights and made an escape using the darkest cover. The armed response units were called as a precaution and patrolled the entire area, while the helicopter was dispatched in order to try and locate the vehicle with heat cameras. Both teams were unsuccessful in finding them, as by the time that they'd arrived on scene, they'd gotten away. CCTV was also checked, but yielded absolutely nothing. I told her that I was sorry if they felt that I'd wasted their time, and that I guess I'd overreacted on the account of my PTSD. She told me that, as far as they're concerned though, I did the right thing. She also said that there have been a few isolated accounts of gunshots having been heard in that area over the last few years, so to maybe rethink taking my walk so late at night. I didn't have the energy to explain again why I used to wait until it was so late to go walking, but any advice about avoiding getting shot is good advice in my books. So instead, I just agreed with her and ended the call. After I'd hung up, though, I just kind of sat there for a few minutes, going over the whole thing in my head. It was most likely nothing when all is said and done. Just wrong place, wrong time, I suppose. But if nothing else, it's taught me that being hypervigilant isn't always such a bad thing. G'day mates, it's Busta here. And before the episode continues, I would like to just give a shout out to SimpliSafe for sponsoring this episode. SimpliSafe home security is like getting commercial-grade, enterprise-level security, but for your own home. Think about the security Fortune 500 companies use. They need to know that police are going to be on the scene immediately. And this is exactly the kind of security you get with SimpliSafe. For instance, if there's a break-in, SimpliSafe uses real video evidence to give police an eyewitness account of the crime, and that means that police dispatch up to 350% faster than for a normal burglar alarm. But with SimpliSafe, you get comprehensive protection for your home, outdoor cameras and doorbells alert you to anyone approaching your home, entry, motion and glass break sensors guard inside. Plus, SimpliSafe protects your home from fires, water damage, and carbon monoxide poisoning too. It's all monitored 24/7 by live security professionals. You can actually set up your own system yourself with no tools needed, or SimpliSafe experts can do it for you. And it's only 50 cents a day with no contracts. So to get started, go to simplisafe.com/scared today to get free shipping on your order, plus a 60-day money-back guarantee. That's simplisafe.com/SCARED to save on home security today. simplisafe.com/scared. He was my first kiss and also first abusive relationship. We started dating when I was a preteen. He was super attentive and protective of me from the very beginning. It wasn't until the 5th month, too, when I started noticing the alarms going off loudly in my head. He had taken me on a cute roller skating date, and we sat down for a bit to take a break when 2 of his friends showed up. At this point, the vibe from him was no longer safe. The smile that he had 5 minutes beforehand was replaced with just a look of pure hatred. He switched into this odd predator mode, kind of, and told me to kiss him with tongue in front of his friends. I told him that I just wasn't ready to do something like that, and especially not in front of other people. He didn't like that answer and pulled my face to his and started forcing his tongue down my mouth. I was a pretty small girl, but luckily I was able to push him away long enough to start running towards a more populated part of the skate rink. I told him to stay away from me while I waited for my mum to pick me up. I didn't tell my mum what happened because I was in shock and also kind of confused, I think. I was young and I didn't want to get into trouble for kissing a boy, so I decided to just ignore him until I was able to process everything. A week of successfully avoiding him at school passes when he has worked up the nerve to try something again. He found me surrounded by a group of friends and decided to try his luck. I didn't even notice that he was there, truly, until we were practically bumping elbows. Being that close to him definitely put me on edge, and I nearly shit myself when he started speaking to me again. It was all pointless small talk until he realized that I wasn't in the forgiving mood. Then his mood shifted like before, and he was just staring at me like I was the most disgusting human on the planet. I was holding one of those old portable CD players when he yanked it out of my hands and started trying to shove it into his bag, in a kind of crappy attempt to steal it. I yelled at him to give it back and tried prying it from him, which he apparently took offense to because he punched me in the face with enough force to drop me to the ground. I obviously started crying, and we were both sent to the principal's office. His dad was the football coach in the Midwestern community, so he was able to talk the principal into only requiring his son to attend detention once for this punishment. We didn't see each other too much after that, and thankfully ended up going to different high schools as well. But then, I ran into him at a Taco Bell drive-thru in my sophomore year. I didn't realize that he was the cashier until I was at the window about to pay, when we made kind of awkward eye contact. I pretended not to recognize him and hurried with the transaction until I was able to speed away. Unfortunately, though, he saw our chance meeting as a sign of fate and attempted to send the equivalent of "you up?" text to my Facebook profile. Unfortunately, too, I can never unsee his ultra-cringy attempt at flirtation. He said something like, "I think I saw you at Taco Bell today. I was the cashier, LOL. You're pretty cute still, and I was still wondering if you wanted to send some booty pics." Something like that. My response was an immediate block, and I made sure to let my sisters know about the incident because I just had to tell someone. But if I had known then just how dangerous this teenage boy would become, I wouldn't have taken any of the incidences so lightly, but I'm not a psychic, so I didn't know. After some awkward laughs, though, I moved on with my life and continued to date less shitty people. Fast forward to today, though, when my sister sends me an article from her local news report featuring my dear first boyfriend's picture. And apparently, he had decided to stab someone in the throat at a popular venue when they tried defending a woman that he was physically attacking. It was shocking to say the least, but we dated nearly 10 years ago, and I still can't shake that feeling that I definitely dodged a bullet here. It's just a strange feeling, too, when you realize that dangerous people are weaving in and out of your life without you even knowing it, before it's too late sometimes, too. According to the comments in the article, though, he had a habit of assaulting the women in his life and had a history with obsessive stalking. I imagine justice will be served swiftly due to the manner of the crimes and the overwhelming evidence supporting a case against this psychopath, but boy, do I hope that we never see each other again. A couple of years ago, I babysat for a family friend. She and her husband lived with their 2 kids, a girl about 7, who we'll call Kay, and a boy about 12, who we'll call Jay. I babysat these kids so much that we actually became quite close. It was kind of a brother and sisters type deal. They weren't difficult kids either. They had a hard home life because their parents were borderline abusive, I would argue, but they were still good kids. And I tried my best to be a positive adult. I was like 18 or 19 during this experience, though, in their life. The family moved around a lot, and I've known them now for over 6 years, and they've moved every single year, I'd say, and this experience happened in 2015. So I was halfway through my senior year when the family moved into this house. It was nice, just built in 2013 or something like that. A nice neighborhood, but the rent was really low, and the mother often bragged about the steal of a deal that she got from the house. To put it into perspective too, the average rent in this area is about $1,200 just for an apartment, and these guys got a whole 2-story house, 3-bed, 4 baths, freshly built in a nice neighborhood for about $650. I thought that it was weird and asked if there was anything wrong with the house, to which she replied the inspection came back clear. And after I heard that, I really didn't think much beyond that. But when I started babysitting, I immediately just felt like something was off. I have anxiety though, so going to new places really puts me in a funk, so I just figured that it must just be that, and I tried to ignore it. Now, the way the home is set up is actually quite important for this story. On the bottom floor, they had this living room, dining area, and kitchen with some other rooms. I spent most of my time in the living room working on things for school while the kids were upstairs playing games or with their friends and whatnot. While you're in the living room too, there's a wall that blocks you from seeing the stairs. Upstairs there are bedrooms. Immediately off the stairs and above the living room is the parents' room, which is off limits to all the kids. Then a loft area that looks down over the front door to make a kind of grand foyer feeling. There's a light too that can be on, which can be seen from downstairs because of the loft, and then the kids' bedrooms were down a hallway. So, nothing ever really happened at first that was too mind-boggling, just little noises here and there, knocks on the walls, things being misplaced, lights flickering, but nothing made me think ghosts automatically. Quite honestly, I just figured that they got what they paid for, and also that my memory was garbage. But after a couple of months of that, things started to pick up a bit. The kids, who were usually very sweet and kind to each other, started becoming kind of noticeably more snappy to everyone, especially Jay. He had complained about nightmares that he had started having about someone standing in his doorway just watching him. His parents wouldn't listen though, and their behaviour grew even worse as time went on. It was a weekend, I think, and the parents were going to be gone for a while, and the kids were upstairs just doing their thing. I was downstairs in the living room looking at the pizza to order for lunch, when, out of nowhere, I hear really loud footsteps coming from above me in the parents' bedroom, thunderous even. Thinking that it was the kids being little dingus meats, I immediately headed upstairs to tell them to get out, but when I got there, I was greeted with the two kids standing in their doorways, staring at the closed door to their parents' room, and the footsteps and the bangs were still continuing inside. At this point, I thought for sure that it was an intruder, and instructed the kids to get into their rooms and lock their doors quietly, while I called 911 and explained the situation. As I stayed on the phone, the footsteps continued to walk around the room, and I could hear it moving to different locations of the room even. 2 officers arrived, so I grabbed the kids and we waited outside, the banging still continuing as one of the officers escorted us out. But they came out completely empty-handed and said that nothing was there and that it may have been something with the door because the banging stopped as soon as they opened it. But I had felt the shaking of the floor moving around in the room, so I knew that it wasn't the door. But I guess I'm in denial, and I ignored it and took the kids out for ice cream that afternoon, trying not to think about it. Another time, the kids and I were sitting in the dining area just eating dinner. It was only us 3 in the house, and from the dining area, you could see the lights upstairs were on, and it was casting a kind of shadow onto the front door. I was making a joke about how I'm the only one who knows how to turn a light off around here, when I saw a shadow of a hand from upstairs on the front door, and I think that that's when it really started settling down with me that the house was probably haunted. The kids didn't see it, and I didn't tell them. I figured that it would just add to the stress that they didn't need, and plus, it was only a quick glimmer, so I'm not even sure that I saw it. I told the parents that night when they came home, but they kind of brushed me off, saying that they haven't experienced anything. This continued for a while too, and I would experience something, the kids would, but the parents just wouldn't believe any of us. It was summer when I eventually graduated from high school, and I remember it vividly because I was awake reading articles about a huge shooting that happened in my town. And that was when the banging from upstairs started happening again, and quite honestly, I was kind of used to it at this point, but what I wasn't used to was the banging footsteps coming down the stairs. These steps, too, were methodical and really menacing, and I felt a terrible energy in the room, and it was cold despite it being in the middle of summer in the south. I counted the seconds between the steps, and it was 5 every single time. I called out to the kids and told them to stop joking around, but somehow deep down I knew that this wasn't the kids. I was terrified. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs, and I couldn't see who was there. But then, and I'll never forget this, I saw something, an apparition, and it looked like a little girl, and she had brunette hair and a red dress. She looked innocent enough, but the energy in the room was so heavy that, quite honestly, I almost threw up. She looked at me and I looked at her. She didn't move. I figured that I must be hallucinating, and I began rubbing my eyes, but when I finished rubbing them, she was just right in front of me all of a sudden. In that situation, I couldn't move or do anything. My mind just went to kid brain and I hid underneath the blanket that I was using. I called the parents crying and told them to come back immediately. When they came, the energy in the room lightened and I finally came out from under the blankets. And she was gone. They asked what was wrong and what happened, and I told them that it didn't matter because they wouldn't believe me anyway. I then informed them to find another babysitter because I would not be returning after that. I still wonder about those kids though, and I really do hope that they ended up okay. I do know that they moved out of the house at the end of the year, but I'm not sure if what I saw was attached to them or not. In fact, I'm still not even sure what I saw. Anyways, if you've made it this far, thanks for listening, and I really appreciate it. Sorry if this is a bit scrambled, but this is just how it plays out in my head anyway. I still have nightmares about that girl, and it's still a really frightening event for me. This happened to me about 6 months ago. My boyfriend at the time and I were sitting in the living room of my apartment when I heard a knock at the door. My ex asked if I was expecting anyone, and I said no, but I would take a look just in case to see who was out there. He stayed on the couch while I looked through the peephole. The apartment was set up in a way that didn't allow him to see from the living room to the front door. Outside, though, there were two people. One young African-American man, looked to be about mid-20s, and a much older Asian man who looked to be about 60-ish. For whatever reason, too, I decided to open the door. When I opened it, the young man says, "Hi, we're a part of so-and-so religion, and we would like to talk to you about it." I have a 50-pound dog who was trying to get out, so I said, "Sure, hold on, I'll come back outside because my dog is trying to get out." But this was a huge mistake. I want to clarify that this was very out of character for me too. However, I had recently become closer to God and was wanting to give these people a chance, as I didn't believe any harm would come by just listening to what they had to say. So, I step outside and close the door behind me and listen to what they have to say. They said something about how they pray to Mary instead of God because she was the one who birthed Jesus. I don't exactly remember what it was, but something like that. I thank them for their time, and they say something like, "But thank you guys, stay safe out here." The Asian person visibly starts panicking and saying things that I don't understand in a different language. When I look to the partner to see what he was going to say, he says, "No problem, maybe you just want a pamphlet though." I reply, yeah, sure," not wanting to be rude and also do some research on the religion as I'd never heard of it before. The guy then says, "Okay, great. We have them in the car and you can come with us. We're parked right out front." And this is when I started to feel a bit weird. I lived on the third story of an apartment complex that really was not the best and there were no cameras anywhere. Plus, why would they leave their pamphlets in the car like that? If they were going door to door, then it doesn't make much sense to have every person that they intrigued come down to the car, right? And the parking spots outside of my house were almost all handicapped and no one can park there. The Asian person grabbed my arm and started directing me to the stairs, and in a split second, I said, "You know what, I'm a Christian and very happy in my faith, but thank you both anyway." The Asian then said something again in a language that I didn't understand, and the man goes, "Are you sure? We can get it to you fast. We're parked right there." My heart genuinely sank into my butt at that point, and I started sweating and looking for ways to remove myself from this person's grasp, and the situation entirely too. I know that I must have looked panicked, and honestly, I was. I mean, what do? How do I get away from the immediate danger that I just put myself into? I wasn't thinking, obviously, and just blurted out that I was very sure and yanked my hand from this person who ended up scratching me from their grasp, and I just bolted inside. I locked the door behind me and told my boyfriend what happened. That's when he looked at me with a face that I've never seen him make before in my life. He tells me about how that specific religion has been in the news the last few weeks because women have been going missing, and the only thing that they have in common is some of their neighbors saying that they'd been solicited by the group the same day or around that day of their neighbor's disappearance. I read some articles to fact check what he was saying, and turns out that he was right. The police were saying that it might be in connection to a sex trafficking ring that was moving from the neighborhood cities and now was suspected to be in ours. But somehow it gets even weirder, because I seriously freaked out and went straight to Facebook Live to share with my friends because I wanted to warn whoever I could that this was happening. I set the privacy to public after the live ended and I went on with my life. I'm still a bit shaken, but I was okay. But 1 week later, I get a Facebook message from someone who is, I'm assuming, part of that religious group, telling me that I need to take the post down, and she was not nice about it. After I said that I wouldn't because I wanted to educate anyone who lives in my town, she told me that I was a spoiled egg and that I would regret ever making this video. I was so scared that I blocked her immediately, set the video to private, and called the police. The police said that they couldn't do much as I didn't have the make or the model of the car that they were in, and there was no proof that they had even come to my apartment or who it was. But here's the part that still freaks me out to this day, because when I went to show the messages from the Facebook account, I went to unblock the lady and her page was completely deleted. I still had the messages, but it was like I was talking to a little grey default profile picture. Even the name had changed to something that seemed to be random clicks on the keyboard. I want to end this too by saying that I'm working on not being such a trusting idiot with people. I know the things that I should have done differently, and I still get upset with myself for how stupidly I'd acted. So, please be careful out there, guys, because apparently this group is still very much active. I never really got along with my siblings much when we were younger. My parents spoiled me because I was the youngest, but a lot of the times they would believe my older brothers and sisters rather than me, simply because they were more mature. This whole ordeal started when I was 13 years old, though. We used to live in a rural area where there's acres and acres of woodland between houses. A lot of the time my brothers and I would just mess around in the woods, boys being boys sort of thing. We also had an old hound, Benji, that we would take out into the woods as well. Now, the city is not too far away from us, and occasionally we would get homeless persons around and tweakers deep in the woods and so on and so forth, but not too many issues. My brothers go back to college too, and all that's left there are my parents and my sister. I'd still go out to play in the woods, but it'd be by myself or with Benji. And one afternoon I went out with Benji and I noticed that he started acting just really weird. He was whimpering and tail between his legs and everything just kind of staring in one direction. I started getting freaked out and was about to head back when something caught my eye. There was something lying on the ground. I thought that it was an animal because it was furry, but then I noticed the blood. I got a little closer and I saw that it was actually a dog. Its stomach was ripped out and there was just blood everywhere. Its face was mangled and half ripped off blood still dripping from its wounds, and Benji started frantically pulling on the leash, barking and whimpering behind me. And that was when it hit me. The blood, it was still fresh, which meant that whatever killed this dog was still around. I froze immediately and I looked around and tried to see what Benji was barking at. I didn't know if it was a black bear or what, but there was definitely something crouched behind a bush. All I could see was fur, but it was the afternoon and it was starting to get darker, so I couldn't really make out what it was. When all of a sudden, this thing started barking. Not like an animal barking, but kind of like a crazy guy imitating a barking dog. He started out low and got louder and louder, and I couldn't move, and I started hyperventilating and literally pissed my pants. Nothing was going on in my mind, and I couldn't think, just scared shitless. He stood up, though, and started slowly walking toward me, but was hesitant because now Benji was barking and growling at him furiously in front of me. Suddenly, he pulled out a giant knife, and all I could think was, run. Run as fast as you can. I don't want to die, I kept thinking to myself. So I just started running as fast as I could. Luckily, Benji ran with me, always circling around me barking while I was in tears running for my life. Eventually, I got back to my house, ran to my parents and told them what happened. Though they were freaked out, they didn't really believe me and told me that it was probably a bear or something like that. They forbade me to go back outside alone anymore, and my sister kept telling me to stop crying out lies just for attention and stuff, but later that night I couldn't sleep at all, and my sister and I shared a room, and Benji would always sleep in our room. I got up and looked out the window every now and then, paranoid that I would see this guy at the edge of the woods or something. At about midnight, I started dozing off again, but then I heard Benji lowly growling again. I woke right up, and I instantly saw that he was staring out the window. I slowly crept to the window and looked out to see the figure of this guy right in the middle of the backyard, crouched down, staring straight at my window. Benji started growling louder and louder, and it woke up my sister. She asked me, "What the hell are you doing up?" but soon saw that there was something wrong with my expression. When she looked out the window, she screamed so loud that it woke my parents up immediately. The guy unfortunately ran back into the woods before my dad got into the room, and my sister told them what she saw. Finally, they believed me and called the cops, and when the cops got there, they said that there wasn't much that they could do since it was so dark out, and they didn't have enough men to put a patrol car at the house. But they said that they'll come back in the morning to do a sweep of the woods around the area where I allegedly found the dog. The next day, they did a search in the woods, and they did find the carcass, and a couple of hours after that, too, they also found the creep close by. When they came back to update my parents on the situation, they told them that it was a guy on PCP, covered in blood, wearing the skin of a dead animal, and apparently he had killed a dog and was eating it raw. My father moved to Manhattan from Peru in 1970. One night during this time period, he was out at a bar with his friend Carlos, also from Peru. Sometime during the night, they were approached by a well-spoken, friendly, nicely dressed American man. He offered to buy them rounds, and they spent a few hours drinking and talking. After a while, the man invited them back to his apartment, somewhere up on the Upper East Side, to keep drinking and just hang out. My father, instantly and instinctively, was not into this idea, but Carlos, drunk and chasing more free drinks, stupidly insisted that they take him up on it. They arrived at the apartment, and after an hour or so, Carlos had passed out, sitting up in the man's reclining chair. Everything had been fine, but my dad was never comfortable with the idea, and now knew that it'd be even more complicated with Carlos passed out like that. He went to the bathroom for a minute to splash some water in his face and sober up himself. When he stepped inside, he immediately noticed a large pair of scissors sitting on the sink. They were way larger than any normal household pair that he'd seen, and he compared them to something you'd see in a hospital. He told me in this moment that his entire body was overtaken with instinct, and something inside of him made him pick up the scissors and put them in the waist of his pants behind his back. When he walked back out to the living room, he found the man with his hands on Carlos's leg. He asked him what he was doing and said that they were leaving right now, and the man told him to just relax and keep drinking. But enough was enough, and my father was insistent. At this point, he said the man's face dropped, his voice lowered, and his whole demeanor just changed. He said, "You're not going anywhere," was the man's reply as he produced a large knife from a pocket of his own. Upon this, my father pulled the scissors from behind his back and locked eyes with the man. They stood tensely for a moment as my father explained in words or less, "I've got scissors and you've got a knife. If you come for me, I'm getting you too." The man, realizing the stalemate, put the knife down and said, "Get the hell out." My dad shook Carlos awake, practically carrying him to his feet, and pushed him out the door, never taking his eyes off the man or his hands off of the scissors. He said that the man just kind of stood there and glared at them as they backed down the hallway and into the elevator. I used to fight with my parents a lot as a teenager, and that led me to being kicked out once I graduated high school. I was almost 19 at this point, though, which for me wasn't really a problem. I had my own job and my own car, and my friend's parents had a spare bedroom that they were willing to let me rent out, so it worked out fine. This being said, though, I'll change names, and let's call my friend Kelly, and her mum Lena, and her dad Kenneth. So Kenneth and Lena had a lot of weird friends due to the fact that they were partiers, and a lot of these friends were really nice people, just weird, and you could tell that they had issues such as drugs or criminal past and whatnot. But there was one guy, though, that was just kind of beyond weird. Just someone that, even though I didn't know him, just made my skin crawl. His name was Joey. So I came home from work one day, and the only person at our house was Joey. As soon as I walked in, he said hello and then made a comment about how beautiful I was. Now, I don't consider myself good-looking in the slightest. I'm decent, I suppose, average at best, but I kind of said thanks and just walked off to do my normal routine. As I was making my lunch and cleaning up my mess, I felt someone staring at me, though. Turns out, it was Joey. He'd followed me into the kitchen and was just standing in the only doorway, just staring at me. I asked if I could get him anything, but he just shook his head and continued to stare at me. This made me very uncomfortable, so I just kind of nudged him over and headed straight for my room and locked the door until I heard my roommates get home. Joey left around dinner time, and I thought that it was fine and went on about my nightly routine and went to bed as usual. But he must have come back because he was sitting at the breakfast table when I went to get my cereal. Again, the whole time, just staring, so I ended up just eating in my room. Friday night rolled around. Lena, Kenneth, and Kelly told me that they were going to throw a huge party and I should invite whoever I want. And I just had a feeling that Joey would be there, so I invited the most intimidating male person that I knew at the time, my neighbor or friend, Charles. He was a huge guy, 6'5", and if I had to guess, close to 300 pounds. Charles was also covered nearly head to toe in tattoos and was an ex-Hell's Angel, but he also was the type that, unless provoked, wouldn't hurt a fly. I explained while inviting him the day before about Joey, and what he told me scared the ever-loving shit out of me. He knew Joey, and knew that he was on the run from the police for sexually assaulting a teenage girl the year before, and that I needed to stay far away from him. But the scary part doesn't end there. No, it gets much worse. Now, I'm usually not a cop caller, but I went straight home and I packed my things and I left to a safe place and called the police. And when they arrested him, they looked through his phone and he had multiple pictures of me on it. Most of them were of me sleeping or even in the shower, and he also had text to another person about me and about what he and this other friend wanted to do to me. I no longer talk to Kelly or her parents, and when someone gives me a bad vibe these days, I instantly get away from them. I will be forever grateful to Charles, though, because he may have just saved my life that day. This happened around 15 years ago, and I think that I was in the 8th grade at the time. We lived in a typical suburb, though, and nothing ever really happened, save for some houses getting TP'd from time to time, I suppose, but it was Friday, late in the school year, so I was excited to get home and go play some basketball at the neighborhood park with some friends. I was on the school bus and was nearing my stop, put away my CD player, just got college dropout, and I remember seeing one of those white cargo vans parked on the side of the road. This wasn't totally out of the ordinary, a typical neighborhood street, and it could be any construction or utility company doing some work at someone's house, I suppose. So I exited the bus and started walking home, my house being about half a block away. But as soon as the bus left, this white cargo van pulled up next to me. The man driving was looking at me in a way that I can't describe clearly, but he was wide-eyed with a menacing smile and long sideburns. Honestly, he kind of looked like a wolf. Within a second of them pulling up, though, the man was yelling at me to get into the van and someone was sliding the side door, and I just booked it. I moved so quickly, too, that I didn't even get a good look at the person opening the side door. I ran down the sidewalk toward my house and heard the van tires screech behind me and knew that I wasn't going to make it with enough time to unlock the door and get in safely. I also knew that no one would be home yet, so I made a split decision and pounded on my cranky neighbour's door, then ran behind his house into his backyard. I heard him swing open his screen door and the van screech off, and I went back around to the front, and my neighbour was still standing at his front door. I must have looked like a ghost too, because he immediately told me to come inside so that I could call my parents. This old man, who had yelled at me and my siblings countless times for walking through his grass or riding our bikes on the street, probably saved my life that day. So, to Mr. Chuck, rest in peace, and may your front lawn always be kid-free and all the BMX bikes burn in hell. A few months back, I went on a date with a guy who seemed familiar to me, but I just couldn't put my finger on where I'd seen him before. I assumed that I might have met him on a night out or something. It was a last-minute thing, though, and I told him how I wasn't looking for anything, but it would be nice to hang out. And that was a mistake. When I met him, at first he seemed like an alright guy, but things quickly turned when we got to a restaurant. He didn't order, but I did. And he started saying things about loving my curves and my body. I laughed it off, but I thought that he was being a bit too forward. He could have put it nicely or kept that to himself. While having my food, he began telling me about how I was different from other girls because they don't give nice guys like him a chance. Red flags were immediately going off, so I came up with a story that I could only be out for a little bit because my parents wanted me to dog sit and stuff like that. He bought it, but then proceeded to stare at my breasts and say things about how he wished he could see me without clothes on, even saying that I should send him a picture. I told him that I don't do that and that he was making me uncomfortable. He stopped, but then told me how he brought me a gift. He pulled out of his bag a bouquet of roses, which I did think was actually quite sweet, and a bag of Tesco prawns. That confused me, and honestly, I just kind of burst out laughing. I asked why he got them, and he said that he knew that I liked tempura and prawns. But the thing is that I never once told him that I did, so alarm bells were definitely going off again. My head was now telling me to run, but I didn't want to be rude, so I stayed until the time that I said I would, and after that I left. So I had less than an hour left. He kept talking too, but he actually started to scare me because he started guessing aspects of my life, like uncannily, like the school that I went to, what I was like as a kid, what I'm currently doing. He just got every part right. It scared me because, well, I haven't told him any of this, and I haven't posted any of this online, so I backed away and asked him how he knew all of that. And it turns out that his mother was actually one of my teachers in school, and he asked her everything that she knew about me and looked online for anything about me currently. I don't know when he asked her, but at this point, I definitely wanted to get out of there. And thank God for my mum. Not long after, I got a text from my mum asking how things were. He didn't see the text, but saw that it was my mum, and I just said, "Oh my goodness, my mum and dad got the times wrong for the pictures, so I have to go home now for my dog. I'm so sorry." The guy just accepted that, and then started to walk me home. I said something about only going about halfway because I'm not comfortable with people knowing where I stay, but he then started insisting. And he then dropped the bombshell that he knew that I stayed on X Road, but didn't know which house was mine. I told him that that was really weird and that it creeped me out that he knew that. He claimed that I told him, but I never tell people that. So I started to walk to the main road for my own safety, but he then grabbed my hand and said that he knew a shortcut. I was getting really scared when he stopped and shoved his tongue down my throat. I shoved him away and told him to stop it, and he apologized. That's when I noticed a stranger walking a dog coming, so I used that as an opportunity and said that I needed to go, and I went to the main road. I thought that I was safe, honestly, but I wasn't. The guy kept walking with me, and I stopped and told him that I wanted to part ways here and how it was nice to meet him again. He then looked confused and said that we had never met. He said something about meeting on a night out just to get me to come with him, and I then began saying, "Look, I have to go. when he cut me off, grabbed me and pulled me near some bushes, saying, "Before you go, there's one more thing." I told him that I needed to go and to let go of me, but he just ignored me. The guy then pulled me in, hurting my wrists, and kissed me again. He saw the bushes and said about having privacy, and I managed to shove him off and tell him no. He then grabbed me again and tried to take me to the bushes, saying it'll only take a second, while I resisted. Some dog walkers came by and he stopped and pulled me to kiss me again, but this time he grabbed my breast and I shoved and screamed. I said no and just ran. My heart was racing and I was terrified. I thought that he might have tried to do something to me. I kept looking back, but he was nowhere to be seen. I ended up taking the long way home just in case that night, and when I got in, I just started to cry because I thought something bad was going to happen to me when I got a message from another account because it was him. He said about how lovely it was meeting me and how it was the best date ever, how I was the prettiest girl that he'd ever kissed and that he would love to see me again, adding how he hoped that I had a lovely time too and that he showed that he was a gentleman, then adding that he was now on my road. I just hit on the floor for the rest of the day after that, and when I looked at his profile, I actually remembered where I'd seen him before at that moment. He used to message my old Facebook account years ago with weird messages and creepy edits saying how he liked me. This whole event happened within an hour and a half, but boy, did it feel a lot longer than that. So I was vacuuming my house at 9:30 p.m. with my music playing when I get a knock on my door. My boyfriend was at work and I was not expecting company, especially so late at night. So I turned my music down and realized that the door is actually not locked. Instantly, I'm terrified. I mean, I'm only 4'10", so I had to prop myself up to the wall to look through the peephole, and I carefully locked the door. More pounding, and the man outside my door is no one that I recognize, and looks kind of disgruntled, dirty, and quite frightening. He was short and stocky and looked angry. He grew frustrated knowing that I'd just turned my music down. He heard me lock the door and started calling out, "Ma'am," more knocking, "Excuse me, ma'am." But how did he know that I was a woman? I looked around the room and see my blinds were open and realized that he must have been watching me vacuum. Thankfully, my neighbors right across from me opened their doors, and the husband asked, "Hey, excuse me, who are you and what are you doing?" Startled now, the creep fumbles and says, "Oh, good evening, sir. I was just going to offer my carpet cleaning services to her." The husband goes, "That's great, buddy. She doesn't want it. You need to leave, right now." And the creep left promptly. Afterwards, I called the police, my boyfriend, and closed up my blinds and texted the neighbors to thank them for scaring him away. I paid extra to live on the top floor as well, but it seems that this creep must have been watching me from below. So when I was 13, I had not long broken up with this girl who supposedly had a psycho family. One of this girl's family was a close friend who was supposedly obsessed with her. I was invited out with my friends after school one day, and this boy latched on. Everybody told me to come out and that he wanted to make amends and he understood why I did what I did, etc., etc. Being the pushover that I am, I went out and we hung out in the parks and smoked and drank and whatnot. As it started to get dark, I decided to go home, and I felt uneasy about being around him, and he started acting all weird, talking about fights that he'd been in, and bragging about bashing some guy's face in with his fists in school. And so, because I didn't feel safe whatsoever, I just left. Now, the next day, my best friend and all the other kids that were out that night came into school and told me that it got worse after I left. Apparently, after they had drunk some more, he started waving this huge kitchen knife around. It was telling everybody how he was going to stab me in the stomach for breaking that girl's heart. Now, let me point out, too, that I only know the details of this because I have a relative in the local police force. In the end, my dad made us move, too, because he actually knew where I lived. I continued getting death threats on social media, though, until about a year or two later when it was in the paper. It was spread around town that he had broken into somebody's house and stabbed a man to death and then slit his wrists in the man's bathtub. They found high amounts of cocaine and cannabis in his system, along with a lot of alcohol. The elderly neighbors phoned the police when they heard some commotion and they hadn't seen the man leave for work that day. And they found him barely conscious, and he's now in a psych ward. This was also supposedly over this girl again. Anyway, I think that I dodged a big bullet there. So this happened when I was in high school several decades ago. At the time, I had zero interest in anything paranormal. I was heavy into science and all things logical, really. And anyway, in the 11th grade, I switched high schools to one closer to home. On the second or third day there, a student walked up to me that I didn't know and introduced himself. I was new and he was cool to me, so we made friends right away. So we started hanging out, me and his other friend, who was also a nice guy. We were kids just doing normal teenager stuff, but one evening while hanging out at my friend's house and listening to some music, he told me that he knew that I was coming to their school. Intrigued, I asked how he knew that, and he said that their Ouija board told them that I was coming. I asked how long ago I'd told them that, and even though I don't remember his exact reply, I remember that it was longer than even I knew that I was going to change schools, which was odd. But naturally, I'm in complete disbelief about any of this Ouija board nonsense, and even told him that. So, him and his friend pulled it out and started using it in front of me. Now, understand that they're sitting on this bed using it, I'm on the other side of the room sitting down, and he asks me to ask it something. So, determined to show them just how silly this Ouija board nonsense was, I began asking it questions that these two would absolutely have no way of knowing. They were deeply specific things about my family, dates, names, places, etc. This was before the internet as well, and these were just normal teenagers like myself, so I know that they didn't know this information. Since I wasn't even close to it, and they were the ones touching it, I thought that I would totally trip it up. But, to my astonishment, it actually answered every single question that I posed to it with 100% accuracy. Which, let me tell you, was absolutely impossible. My friends kept looking up at me when it would answer to gauge my reaction, and I remember getting goosebumps just all over my body. I couldn't believe that this was actually happening, but somehow there was something behind that device that knew just all that stuff about me. To this day, I still wonder about it, and what it was, how it knew. Especially how it knew that I would change schools before even I did. To this day, I still won't allow one in my house. I don't know what force is behind them, but I think it's for the best to just leave them alone. This happened about a week ago. I was going to a gothic fair in a place that I didn't really know well, but it was in my city, so I thought that I was going to be okay. Now, for context, yes, I'm a 20-year-old woman walking alone. Sounds like an easy target, I know, but this happened at 4 p.m. in the middle of summer. It was broad daylight, and even though it wasn't crowded, there were definitely people around. So I got out of the subway and I started checking my phone for directions, but I quickly put it away in my bag so I don't look distracted or get it taken from my hands and stuff. I had actually had a phone stolen that way before. I started walking while checking the street names and numbers when a couple, they must have been around 35 years old, approached me and asked for directions. I told them that I was lost too, and they said that they weren't from here either and asked where I lived. I'm not stupid, so I gave them some sort of a vague answer and then I left. But 2 minutes after that, they approached me again and told me where the fair that I was going to was located, and I said thanks and I started walking that way. As I walked, they followed me and tried to start a conversation. I tried to walk faster and leave them behind because I don't trust strangers, but they just kept going with me. At some point too, the conversation, It was only the man talking to me, shifted to jobs and occupations, and the man said, "I do have a job, but most of the time it isn't enough, so I have to do what I do. Usually I'm not violent, but I have a gun to use with dumb people who scream or make a scene." And then said, "Now show me if you value more your life or material things." He obviously expected me to hand my bag over, and I know that this is going to sound so edgy, but I'm deeply depressed, and my train of thought went straight to, I either hand over my hard-worked-for money that I was excited to spend in nice things today, or I finally die. I acted calm, although my heart was beating fast and I was sweating. I didn't scream, I didn't hand over my stuff either. And instead, I just took my bottle of water and took a sip, and then I just kept walking, thinking that it wouldn't be all too bad to get shot and die there. And they just kind of stood there, confused, and after a while, they left. In the end, too, I ended up going to the fair, and I had a nice time. I have a story from when I was about 12 or 13 years old. I'm 34 now. So, I grew up in Portland, OR, and I'm pretty sure that our house was haunted. One night, I was walking down the hallway to go to my bedroom, and I saw a full black shadow figure just run across the wall. I remember freaking out and running, and I tried to recreate it to see if it was my shadow in some way, but I could never recreate it. Another night, I was babysitting my two little sisters, probably 4 or 5, and I'm probably 14, and it was late and my parents weren't home, and we were in bed, a bunk bed, and my sister's on the bottom and I was on the top. My sisters are both fast asleep, and I actually suffer from insomnia, so I was up. I'm just staring at the door that was half closed, and all of a sudden the hall light comes on, and the bathroom light too. Then, footsteps and the sound of the medicine cabinet closing. The heavy footsteps and light goes off, and I didn't see a shadow indicating that someone was physically there. But my parents aren't home, and my little sisters are fast asleep by now, and obviously I'm in full-blown panic fear. And what happened next I tried to recreate also, but failed. Oh, and by the way, the window is definitely closed. So, the door that's halfway closed just all of a sudden closes right before the latch and opens halfway. This repeats 4 or 5 times before it just stopped open a little wider than it originally was. I tried physically moving the door, but couldn't get the impossible speed the door was doing. We had carpet in the room, so there was always some resistance when closing and opening the door. And, needless to say, I was pretty terrified that night. I've had other experiences in the house that I might share at a later time, but thanks for taking the time to listen, and I do hope you enjoy a fraction of my experiences. So I had something just really bizarre and scary happen the other day. My wife and I were taking our dog out for a run, and call me weird, but one of the most beautiful spots in our small town is the cemetery. We take her there once a week to run around the area. But don't worry, she doesn't run on graves or anything like that. So everything's going good, and we get there and let the dog go out and go park in our usual spot, and she comes running back very fast, and I can tell that she seems a bit spooked or something. Which, okay, that's odd, because she always wants to run to every tree and smell it, and normally it's a pain in the ass to get her ready to leave. So we figured that we should head out and find a different spot to let her run. On our way out, though, we see an oddly shaped rock on the top of the ridge just outside the cemetery. My wife stopped the car so that we could get a better look, and something just felt odd about this. So my wife gives out a little whistle to confirm it was nothing, and it lifts its head. She whistles once more, a little louder than the first, and it turns and looks at us, and this person, or whatever it seemed to be at that moment, just sat there with its head cocked in our direction. And the face looked like a dog's. A big brown dog with a long snout. Yep, this dog has arms and looks like it's using a smartphone or something. And then this overwhelming sense of just fear comes over me, and I tell my wife to drive and just get out of there fast. And I swear on my life that I saw this thing with my own eyes. It's crazy the fear that you feel when you see something that you simply just cannot explain. I actually plan on going back on my days off and to see if I can find some evidence or something. Please let me know if you guys would like me to give you an update. A few weeks ago, I was cuddled up with my 3 kiddos watching Merlin in the mid-morning, and it was a weekday, so my significant other was at work, and we all had some pretty gnarly colds. We always keep our door locked since we've had many instances of neighbor kids just walking into our house. Usually it's little kids who just don't know any better, but we've had a few times where it's been a kid chasing one of mine trying to fight them or something. This has made our dog really territorial too about anyone coming in, so we lock the door for pretty much everyone else's safety. And this particular day, my significant other forgot to lock the door when he left. So we're all cuddled up and I'm nursing my baby, and suddenly my dog just loses his mind, which is pretty normal to be honest. I mean, we had maintenance guys come in and out of the apartment across the way, and he had spent several days just barking at them until I could calm him. This time, though, he ran back into my room, clearly panicked by whatever he was hearing. So I get up to go and check and see so I can calm him down. He just won't stop barking unless I check it out first. I step over the baby gate in my bedroom doorway and look down the hallway to see a guy that I do not know standing there. I quickly shut my bedroom door behind me, thinking it was a maintenance guy who let himself into the wrong house, and I immediately start telling him that he went to the wrong place. We had no notice that we'd be getting a visit from a maintenance guy, and he should know better because of my dog. And the guy just kind of smiled at me and asked me if I was Yoni, and then started apologizing for having the wrong house, asking if I was sure that this was the wrong house. He didn't turn to leave, and instead he took a few steps further into my house towards me, and it was then that I realized that he had a lit cigarette in his hand that he was actively smoking while standing in my living room, so clearly not maintenance. I told him that he wasn't supposed to be here, and he needed to leave now, and he laughed again and said that this was the address that he was given. Was I sure? I told him to go, that my dog would hurt him. The dog was going nuts in my room, by the way, the whole time during this exchange, and he apologized and walked a few more steps towards me. And at this point, I raised my voice and told him to just get out, and my dog will attack him. As I was yelling, my older son opened my bedroom door right then, and the dude saw my dog standing in my doorway. He looked back at me as if almost sizing me up, and at the dog too, and then just left really quickly. Now, it's possible that he was just a super weird dude and actually had the wrong house, but I told him to leave at least 5 times, and he made no moves to leave my house until my dog was free to come at him. Also, what kind of person just walks into the home of someone who they don't know well while smoking a cigarette? I'm glad that my dog is huge and scary sounding because, honestly, he mostly just wanted to hide behind me, and I don't think that he would have been much help if the guy had been just a little bit braver. So, just to give a little bit of background, I'm actually a pretty skeptical person, and although I must admit that I've experienced 1 or 2 unsettling stories, I usually give it another explanation, such as, well, sleep paralysis, or just something that I probably misunderstood. But there have only been 2 experiences that have left me wondering deeply, did that just happen? The first one was a UFO sighting back in 2007, and the last one was only about 9 days ago. So, I live in Mexico, and where I live is pretty much a big city now. I tend to travel with my father's family, though, around the country 2 or 3 times a year. About 2 weeks ago, we went on a weekend family trip to La Sierra Gorda, which is basically a bioreserve in the northern part of the state. We rented a big house for about 14 family members total. My cousins and I love talking about creepy stuff, like basically skinwalkers but Mexican, and witches, which are supposedly very common in the native villages in the rural areas, and the truth is that only some of us have good stories about this type of paranormal stuff, but nothing has happened to us while on a trip. And, long story short, the first 2 days went pretty much smoothly. We had fun exploring, ate together, and spent the nights drinking and doing family games and whatnot. But on the third night, my younger cousin and I'm 20 years old and he's 18, decided to go UFO hunting, but the truth is that we just wanted to explore the area, and we did this occasionally, so we weren't expecting something to happen. So it was about 7 p.m, but the daylight saving times is not until April the 7th here in Mexico, so it was getting dark by that time, and we promised not to wander very far from the house, and we really didn't. We were just chatting about random stuff, and I remember that we were talking about college when we just got this horrible smell. And it was just so strong and so intense that it had me wondering why it wasn't gradual, because it just kind of hit us. Anyway, it turns out that it was the carcass of a dead sheep in a little river stream about 4 meters or 14 feet from us. We got so disgusted, though, that we rapidly changed directions to a more open area, and there is when we saw this thing. Now, I'm not saying that I saw a chupacabra. I don't really believe in myths, but when we pointed our phones' flashlights to the grass, we saw this thing, and the best way to describe it would be like a huge hairless dog with its back legs positioned like a frog or a rabbit, kind of. Another thing that I noticed was that its mouth wasn't as long as a dog's. It was kind of more compact. Keep into account, too, that we only saw it for about 2 seconds. So, we saw it, and when we heard something running through the tall grass and pointed at it after complaining about the smell, we panicked so much that the thing just ran away in a straight line, and we turned around and ran as fast as we could back to the house ourselves. My legs were shaking, and the adrenaline was rushing through me, and I must say that I was more weirdly excited than panicked. I guess that it looked so bestial or animal-like that it didn't really scare me like a ghost or a Wendigo would or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense, but I did have chills for about 2 hours straight, and they came back every time I tell the story too. Our family sort of believed us, especially our cousins, but they mocked us, saying that it was probably just a wild dog or something. Anyway, I came here to tell this story because it was just really weird and both exciting and a terrifying experience at the same time. And I'm also hoping that someone has seen something similar. I thought that you guys may enjoy the experience, and, well, I'm kind of hoping that maybe you guys have your own stories to share. So this all started when I was 17. I joined an amateur beauty contest in our small town, and I began talking to myself at the mirror for hours, practicing speech or just being comfortable with myself and that self-confidence building stuff. I must admit, though, that I did become vain and pretty obsessed with how I look, with a full body mirror being my only companion most of the time. After the pageant, though, I was myself again, and that normal version of me that doesn't stay more than 5 minutes in front of the mirror came back. And this is when my parents, relatives, and neighbors started seeing someone that looks exactly like me in our house. And over the years, these are some of the scenarios. Always on our 2-story house, mind you. So on one occasion, early morning, Mum checks on me and I'm still sleeping. She goes down and I'm already sitting at the sofa. Runs to my room and I'm still sleeping. Runs to the living room and nobody's there. Another occasion, middle of summer of 2010, I was convincing my brother to help me set up the trampoline in our backyard. Dad walks in. He claims that he just saw me standing by the staircase staring at our pictures on the wall. He said that he even offered some snacks, but I didn't say anything and nor bothered to look at his direction. And we all went to the said location and there was nothing. One evening my grandma was staying for dinner and she said that she saw me go upstairs and she called my name many times, but I didn't even bother to stop or look at her. A minute passed and I emerged from the bathroom and asked her why she was calling me. Every other member of my family was at the kitchen making dinner too when this happened. Another time I started working after college and was living about 2.5 hours away from home at my apartment. Relatives will see me at my bedroom window just staring outside, and when they call out my name, you'll suddenly turn back and shut the window close. Were exactly my cousin's words as she called me after the incident, adding that it was a really unusual manner coming from me. Sometimes neighbours will ask my mother if I was visiting or spending the weekend, and that will always terrify my mum because apparently when I'm away, she won't show herself to members of the family and will just stay near the window. based on the stories from relatives and neighbours. My mum and dad are always seeing me at one place when they just saw me where they came from, and this doppelganger doesn't speak at all, but most of the time just storms out and smashes doors. The most recent incident, though, was last Christmas when I was home spending time with my family. My brother knocked on my bedroom door because it's time to open our Christmas presents, and he just kind of saw me walk inside my room and shut the door behind me. Mind you, this was right after he emerged from his room to fetch his phone charger. I was actually downstairs with our parents waiting for him so that we could start opening our presents. He was really disturbed by this event too, because it's his first time seeing my doppelganger, and even begged all of us to check my room, but as usual, there was nothing there. Over time, my parents got used to this, but my grandma warns me every now and then because she said that it's apparently a bad omen, and also reprimands me every time she remembers the reason, and as per old folks here, it's my vanity and endless talking to the mirror that triggered this thing. But they said on my case that this thing was formed due to extreme self-obsession and left the mirror when I stopped talking to it. Also, its main purpose is to replace me or something. They perform some sort of ritual around the house, including offering a live animal, usually a chicken, annually so that it doesn't get strong and stays calm, since they can't make her leave. The side note too is that she can't also leave the house, apparently. I used to be pretty freaked out by this, and used to dream about two versions of me, or someone that looked exactly like me but is constantly trying to kill me. I made myself believe that this is only because of the stories that old folks tell me, or maybe I'm just overthinking it. I'm obviously very skeptical about whether to believe them or not. I mean, I never saw her myself, and I'm turning 28 soon, so that's more than 10 years of a safe, happy and healthy life, of me and this doppelganger's existence. But, according to these tales or superstitious beliefs, once you see your doppelganger, that will be the last thing that you ever see. Okay, so this happened last night. My friends and I were all hanging out, and it had already been a hectic afternoon. It was a relatively warm evening, so we were going for a walk around the town the majority of us lived in, which is something we do often enough that we would have felt safe doing it individually, let alone the group of 7 people that we were in now. There were 2 15-year-olds and 4 16-year-olds, one of which is a month away from 17. And so, we'd been walking for over an hour now. We always walk to an ice cream shop, which is the furthest point from the house that we meet at, before we turn around and head back. We were already halfway home from there at this 4-way intersection by Dunkin' Donuts, and we're approaching the intersection laughing about something stupid, when this lady across the street just starts screaming. She was borderline old, late 40s or mid-50s or something, and the crazy lady says, "Wait, stop, wait." She runs across the intersection through traffic to get to us, and at this point, all instincts were telling us to turn around. The problem was that, to get home, we had to go in the directions that this person was running from. We approach the intersection just as she reaches us, and the lady says, "Oh good, you're all teenagers. Will you come to our concert later? We have 4 bands. It's teenager music. We've got free pizza and snacks like brownies and cookies. We've even got a popcorn machine." Needless to say, we were a little bit disconcerted. We tried politely to decline, saying that it was getting dark and we were on our way home. However, she would just not let us get a word in edgewise. My friend tried to tell this lady that she didn't like that type of music, but she quickly changed her original statement. She said, "It's all kind of music. Come on, you'll love it. If you don't like it, you can walk right back out. It's just a mile up the street, right over there. Come on, you'll fit right in." And then she forces us in the direction of the concert, trying to get us to follow her. And as if there hadn't already been multiple red flags, this was the first of the more significant ones. All of us were extremely uncomfortable now, but trying to just kind of laugh it off. My cousin was pretty smart though. She held her phone up to her ear as if she was calling someone, although she wasn't. There's terrible cell service in my town, which is something that made everyone even more nervous. But my cousin says, "Hello? Yeah, we're on our way back. We'll be there in a few minutes." And aside to the crazy lady, and then, "Sorry, my dad is calling." And now, crazy lady took practically no notice to this. She just kept trying to convince us, and the sun was almost completely set at this point. We were all itching to just get out of there and go home, so my friend said, "We have to go and ask our parents first." And this is when the most scary and unsettling part of the whole conversation took place. The crazy lady then says, "No, don't tell your parents. It's only half a mile up the road. You have the cell phones, don't you? You can call them on the way there." Now, we were all more than a little nervous at this point, obviously. Everyone is looking at Dunkin' Donuts as though if we looked hard enough, we'd teleport. Nobody really says anything at this point, and we just don't know what to say anymore. The crazy lady then says, "Don't worry, it's in a church. Nothing bad can happen to you." Cue nervous laughter and muffled disagreements. The crazy lady says it's on until 9, we'll be there in half an hour. She gestures across the street to this other lady and 2 kids in matching yellow t-shirts. They come running across immediately, and as we get closer, it's obvious the kids are extremely uncomfortable and would rather be anywhere else in the world. The other lady is definitely older as she has white hair, and the crazy lady then says, "These guys are coming to our concert. They don't know anybody, but..." And the older lady interjects as the kids hand out a few flyers and says, "They don't know anybody? Perfect." And at this point, we were all done with this conversation. We have no intentions of being kidnapped 10 minutes from our destination, so we start walking across the crosswalk to Dunkin' Donuts. They want assurance that we'll go later, and we give it to them, falsely of course. We all went into Dunks because there were more people in there and we felt safer since there hadn't been anyone on the street. All I can say is that the whole thing just felt like an orchestrated attempt at kidnapping. One summer night when I, a female, was around 5 years old, my sister, 8 and female at the time, and I awoke to hear, through our open bedroom window, my parents yelling loudly on the back patio. This was not a common occurrence, and they did fight, and it was not typically anywhere that there was a chance of us hearing, though, but this sort of thing did happen from time to time, and although the situation was mildly unusual, we just kind of shrugged it off, shut the window, and went back to sleep. We promptly forgot about the ordeal, and it wasn't until years later that we learned the truth about the yelling. So, as a near adult, I overheard my mother explaining the situation to a family member in another room. I am a little fuzzy on the details, as this still occurred long ago, but this was the gist of it. So apparently, at some point that night, after my sister and I went to bed, my parents received an unusual phone call from someone using an electric interpreter, the same type of technology a person who is deaf might use to make calls and communicate over the phone. I'm unsure how this technology works exactly, so please excuse my lack of knowledge on this topic. Understandably, my parents were a little bit surprised because, well, we didn't know anyone who would use this service to contact us, but either way, they accepted the call. I'm not sure how the person on the other line introduced themselves, or if they even did at all, but they knew the full names of everyone in my family, which was immediately very creepy and kind of alarming. The conversation began to escalate as the person on the other end of the phone very specifically explained what our house looked like and told my parents that they were hiding somewhere in our backyard, which was a large, dark, and full of all kinds of plants and trees that made it hard to clearly see. There were obviously too many places to look, and at this point, the tormentor made it clear that they had intentions of entering our home and dismembering my sister and I. At this point, understandably, they were beginning to become frantic. There was a chance that nobody was out there, and this was just some kind of cruel joke, but that notion was not worth the risk of believing. My dad asked if they were really where they said they were, and what were my parents doing at that very moment, what were they wearing, and just stuff like that. And this infection of a human on the other end of the line explained exactly what my father was doing, which was waving his middle finger in the air, and exactly what they were wearing, where certain things on her patio were placed, and the expression on my mum's face, and every detail. My dad, a rough guy with a heart of gold, charged into the night ready to kill any person that he encountered. Neither of my parents had cell phones. I don't think they were even a thing at this time, so my mum took the phone, which had finally been put down by my dad, and just called the cops. And as brave, or potentially as stupid, depending how you see it, as my dad was for venturing into the dark that night, he found nothing, and when the cops showed up soon after, they found nothing too. The police were not able to trace the call either because of the electronic interpreter, which they said was a common device used by people trying to anonymously harass others over the phone. Nothing ever really came of this incident, and as I said, I was not told about it until at least a decade after it happened. Was this the work of a former friend or enemy trying to play some kind of cruel joke? Was there an actual murderer in our backyard? I guess we will never know. A few years ago, when I was 11, a girl, and my brother was 6, a new person started being seen in the neighborhood. I know in most places that's not really a big deal, but we live in a really small town. Everyone knows everyone else, and all the kids just kind of play together, even though we're all different age groups. No one had ever seen this guy before, and he was probably around 40, I'd say, had long ratty hair and a scruffy face and an old dirty jacket. Nothing weird happened, but it was just strange that no one had seen him before. A few weeks went by, and at least once every other day, me and my friends would see him somewhere just walking around the neighborhood while we rode our bikes or played tag up and down the streets. But still, nothing strange really happened. But then, one day, me and my brother and 2 of the older boys in the neighborhood, 3 and 14, were walking down the train tracks in the woods that stretch behind all of our houses. And we thought that we could hear walking behind us, but everyone goes there to walk their dogs, so we didn't really care too much or think anything of it. The footsteps kept getting louder and faster, though, until finally the oldest boy turned around and saw the guy jogging in our direction. He told us to run down the path and towards his backyard and tried to talk to the guy. The guy just kept jogging and didn't say anything. We all ran to the boy's house and told his parents, and they called the cops, and shortly after, 2 police came and talked to us and searched around the tracks. They said that they couldn't find anyone, but could see some footprints that looked like an adult's that had been running in the other direction, away from the houses. They said that we did the right thing, and if anything weird happens, to tell the adults and call again. A week or so went by, and we didn't see him again. Until one day, me and my brother were playing in the backyard, and I heard something in the woods. I looked over, and I could see the guy in the bushes just watching us. I screamed, and my stepdad came outside, and the guy was gone. My stepdad called the police, and they came, and pretty much said the same thing as before. A few more days go by, and no one sees him. One afternoon, though, my stepdad took me and my brother into the woods to go play on a big rope swing that's been there just forever. The rope swing is in the woods, and it's on the opposite side of the tracks from where our house is, and we were playing there for a while, and we heard footsteps walking down the tracks. They stopped close to the path to the rope swing, and then we heard rustling in the bushes. At this point, my stepdad grabbed me, told me very calmly and quietly to take my brother and go down a different path that led to the next street, run to the store that was close by, and wait there for him. I took my brother and made him walk in front of me, and just before we turned around a bend, I looked back just in time to see my stepdad walking towards the noise. He pulled something out of his jacket and gave it a flick. It was a big collapsible metal billy club sort of thing, and he kept walking, and we just ran to the store at this point. We went inside, and I got some ice cream from my brother and told Linda, the lady who worked there, what happened. She told us to go and sit down and made a phone call, and I thought that she called the police, but now I'm not so sure, thinking back on it. I think she called my stepdad, to be honest, and she talked for a few seconds, and then she just hung up. She looked worried, but relieved at the same time, and she told us to just stay there and that everything was going to be okay. About an hour later, my stepdad came into the store. He hugged us, talked to Linda quietly, and then he just took us home. Obviously, I asked him what happened, but all he said was that it's all good. Everything's fine now. And no one ever saw that guy again. So just a heads up, these aren't my experiences, they're actually my brother's. So, When my brother was in high school, he's 25 now, and I don't know exactly when these things happened, so we'll just go with high school. He was really good friends with a guy that we'll call Eric. His house used to be a doctor's office in the 1800s, so we're already off to a good start, right? And a lot of really spooky stuff just went down in that house, and I'm pretty sure it still does to this day, but Eric and my brother haven't talked for like a year and a half, so I can't say for sure. But every time my brother went over there, something spooky always went down. And when I say spooky, I would probably crap myself and throw up simultaneously. So my brother had seen what they all dubbed the Watcher at Eric's house on multiple occasions, and a ton of other people have seen too, so he's not just crazy. So when you go into the basement at Eric's house, right when you get down the stairs, there's a laundry room. To the left is the living room, and there's one more room to the right. I forgot what he told me they used it for though. But they were in the living room just playing video games, and from the third room they just heard a bunch of noise, and when they turned around, all this stuff was just falling off of shelves and plants were knocked over, and Eric called out for his mum and dad, but nobody answered. Creepy, right? Well, in my opinion, that's nothing compared to what they all dubbed the Watcher. I call it the Watcher too because it just doesn't interact with people. It doesn't do anything. It just kind of makes really weird and terrifying movements, and it just kind of watches you and observes. It doesn't walk to my knowledge, and it just kind of stands there and looks at you. The basement is the most active area of the house, and probably because it was a doctor's office in the 1800s, so that's where the Watcher was mainly seen. But it was honestly just everywhere in that house, and on one occasion that I'm aware of, Eric and my brother were playing video games and they got up to go and get snacks or something, but when they got up and went to go upstairs, the Watcher was just standing in the corner of the room, staring at them, making absolutely horrifying movements, kind of juttering around. Unfortunately, I don't have any experiences of my own there to share because, well, I've never been to the house, and my brother isn't going to be just like, hey, so we haven't talked in a year and a half, can my brother come over and see if there's ghosts there? And yes, these stories are real, allegedly. My brother doesn't really get scared of stuff, but I could hear the fear in his voice when he told me the encounters that he had there. This is my experience from a long time ago, back when I was in high school, about 19 years ago. English is my third language too, so I'm sorry if I mess up anywhere. So, we just moved into a new home. Lots of stuff and a buttload of furniture was just scattered around the house everywhere. But we managed to arrange my parents' room, the kitchen area, and most of the guest hall, and the dining room too by midnight. My parents were exhausted, so they immediately just went to sleep. And I went to my room and found out that it was in no shape whatsoever to even sit comfortably anywhere, let alone sleep. But I managed to organize a few boxes by closing the door and put a mattress on them. Before I could go to sleep, though, I heard a cat meowing from behind me. I turned and I saw a black cat just gently sitting in the middle of the room, under the moonlight, and constantly meowing. I went towards the cat, and it sat there for a few more seconds before just walking into the shadows. I turned on the light, and it just wasn't there anymore. I searched and searched, and there was just no sign of it. The windows were closed and locked, and in search of that cat, I made a mess of my stuff, and I was in no shape to rearrange them, so I took the mattress and went outside into the hallway. I turned off the lights and laid on the mattress, getting ready for some much-needed sleep, when suddenly I heard footsteps coming from behind me. I thought that my father or my mother probably woke up because of the commotion that I made earlier. The lights were out, and they had no idea that I was sleeping in the middle of the corridor, so I instantly sat up to warn them of my position. And as soon as I turned towards the sound, someone jumped on me. The thing felt like a small girl, or kind of like a midget female with long hair, but with really leathery and hard skin. She was pushing with all she had to get onto my torso using her knees, and I strangled her hardened neck in return. And I know that this is going to sound strange, but it felt like I was choking a polished or varnished small stone column, rather than a neck. Another problem too was her weight. She felt like she was just made out of stone or something. I could barely move, and the worst thing, though, was her limbs seemed like they didn't have any kind of fingers on them. Like, the hands were all amputated from the wrist, and she was trying to push my arms away from her neck. At that point, though, I just didn't care. I was really angry, and I thought it was an intruder, and as I struggled to push that thing away, I stared into its face and couldn't make out any features. The thing was just totally black. I wrestled with it for around 20 seconds before I managed to toss it into a small table below me. I went for the light and turned it on, and it was gone. But the table had been turned over from the impact, and my parents rushed to see what had happened. We even called our neighbours and searched in and around the house for half an hour, and, well, you probably guessed it by now, but we couldn't find anything. We called the cops and filed a report, but that was about it. Nothing ever happened. That is, until several years later when I went abroad for my graduate studies. So, I was living with an undergraduate roommate at the time. A funny guy, kind, and he had a good spirit. However, one night, his scream just woke me up out of nowhere. He was in the process of running into the kitchen, and I instinctively jumped up and ran after him. His face was priceless, and I wish that I had filmed it, but when I asked him what the hell was wrong, he told me that as soon as he laid down on his bed, he saw a little girl sitting on my back while I was sleeping, and as soon as she glanced at him, she made a long jump towards his bed like a frog, and then he screamed and just ran away. Another year had passed, and I just moved into my new girlfriend's house, and on the second night, she screamed, and I instantly jumped out of bed and went for the tennis racket that was beside our bed. I turned on the lights and checked the room and asked her what happened, and she said that there was someone near the doorframe. I ran and checked every nook and cranny around her house, but I couldn't find anything. No entry, no traces of anything unusual, and when I questioned her about what she saw, she answered there was a little girl staring at her. Now, I've got to ask if any of this is even related, or if it's all just a complete coincidence. All I know, though, is that whatever I encountered all those years ago, it was real. So, this is something that I've kept to myself for 2 years now, and every time I think about it, the hair just all over my body still stands up. Here's some context, though. So, my girlfriend and I really like to try and find new hikes in western Colorado. We decided to try a new trail that was not on the national monument and was a ways away from any other trail. It was a good deal of the way out of the town as well, and anyways, we were one of the only cars parked at the trailhead, and as we were walking, it quickly got dark. We made it all the way until the moon rose, and I stopped to hug my girlfriend and have a romantic moment, when all of a sudden, further down the trail, at least a few miles, we hear automatic gunfire. And then silence for a couple of seconds, and again, more shots. Now, this is kind of a normal thing for my area. Even though it was not public land, I knew a lot of buddies who would know of many forgotten trails to shoot on hand and not get caught. My girlfriend asked me if I thought that they were gunshots, and I told her that I couldn't think of anything else in the middle of the wilderness that would make that sound. But we decided that it would be best to just turn back. I mean, we were about 2 miles down the trail at this point, at the top of a very large hill covered in desert shrubs. But as soon as we stopped talking, we realized something was just very wrong. All of the insects had just stopped chirping. And I mean, there had been dozens of crickets the entire hike up, when all of a sudden, just all the sounds of nature completely stopped. My girlfriend was facing further down the trail, and I was facing back the way that we came, ready to turn back, and she looks behind me and then screams and just starts to run. I was already scared, but I figured the worst it could have been was some drunk redneck about to give us some trouble or something. I turned and looked where she looked, and I immediately ran after her. And I have never run so fast in my life. The shrubs were about 2 to 3 feet high in varying spots, and when I turned around, I just don't know how to describe it, but it looked like a shadow, even with the moonlight directly shining on it. And even with the moonlight directly shining on it, it was almost an absence of light. It was already slowly standing up when I turned around, and As soon as it fully rose up, I realized what I was looking up at, and it had at least a foot taller than me on it. Had a very skinny and bony kind of figure, but it was definitely not human. We sprinted back to my car, still with nature silent the whole way, and I was in such a hurry when we ran to my car that neither of us noticed that I didn't have to take my keys out to unlock the car. We were actually halfway through the drive home when we realized that too, and every single hair on my body was raised, and if I'm being honest, I've never felt anything like what I did when I saw it. Every fibre of my being just screamed run, and I was almost paralyzed by fear that just washed over me. I'm wondering too if anyone else has any idea of what it could have been. My apologies if this is a little bit long, but I've just never shared my stories with many people, and I actually think that this will be a great way to share it with people that may be able to relate. So, my partner and I moved into our first apartment together in Pasadena, CA, but the unit was in this old home that was in a beautiful historic part of Pasadena. Our unit was on the third level of the house, essentially being the huge converted attic. The apartment was beautiful and had lots of space. It did have a sort of odd energy from the very beginning, but my partner did not believe in anything supernatural or paranormal, so he would always joke around when I made comments about a space feeling heavy or intense. But after a few weeks, things started to happen in our apartment. It all started with the doors. They would move back and forth or just slam shut. I would make comments to my partner, but he said it was probably just the wind, as we had 2 balconies with lots of air circulation. But I also noticed that our cats were just never inside. I have 2 cats, and they're more like dogs, to be honest. They're always around me and cuddle up and everything, and they usually go outside for 1 to 3 hours a day. In this apartment, they would be gone all day, though, and sometimes they just wouldn't even come back at night. I was trying to be chill about everything because nothing dramatic had occurred yet, but one day I had just left the apartment and my partner was inside alone, and he called me and was really scared over the phone. He told me that he saw a man wearing all black walk through the apartment and into our bedroom. He ran into the bedroom and said that he saw the man walk onto the balcony and just fade away. He was begging me to come home at this point, and when I got back he was trying to rationalize something that wasn't just possible to him. I told him some stories of my past and some encounters that I had with the paranormal, and he calmed down and we eventually went to sleep. But this was just the beginning of absolute hell. So I started hearing something walk and run up and down the stairs. It would always happen throughout the night and started every night at around 2 a.m. I started to lose so much sleep because I would constantly open our bedroom door to check and nothing was there. My partner was a deep sleeper, so he didn't hear anything. Now, I don't think I've ever seen an apparition, but I could sense someone standing right next to me as I slept, I swear. And I know that this may sound weird, but it would talk to me in my sleep. It would tell me to kill myself and other really awful things. I would often wake up and hear whispers, like right in my ear, and the rate of the speech was just so rapid and intense that it would always scare me. My boyfriend was starting to act very detached as well, and he also started drinking daily. We used to have wine night once a week and go out with friends occasionally, but we didn't drink much. I would see him taking shots and hiding vodka and soda and just everything. I didn't question him though because, well, I thought that he was just stressed, but one morning we woke up and I noticed he had scratches just all over his back and on his legs. I freaked out and told him to look in the mirror, and he was really scared and said that he didn't know where they were from. The scratches continued for weeks and bite marks started to form as well, and my boyfriend also saw the man in black again one night. And after that, he was no longer a skeptic. He fully believed that something was in our home. I, being stupid though, started talking to this energy when I was alone. I would ask it to just please leave us alone, and I would sage our home too. Everything just got much worse after that as well, and at night our living room TV would just randomly turn on and the volume would always be at the max. But we would both jump out of bed panicked and turn the TV off, but one day I was watching TV with my cat next to me and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I thought it was my partner at first, but the steps continued towards me and I couldn't see anyone, and I started to get a little bit scared, when suddenly my cat was thrown across the room. My cat screeched and ran off, and I felt cornered and was really scared. I wear black crystals, and I remember at the time just holding onto it for protection. Through all this pain, though, I reached out to a local psychic medium that had experience with home cleansers. I met him in person, and he told me something was with me. I was like, please don't scare me, I just can't handle any more of this weird stuff, and he said, no, there is something with you that isn't human. He told me that he would need to go to our home ASAP. He came a few days later, and he said that the entity was there again, and he spoke with me in private. He told me that this entity was attaching itself to my partner and that he needed to do this bathe cleanse for my partner. I've never told my partner this because he was truly freaked out already, but the medium walked around the apartment and said that there were multiple energies in this home. He said that me talking to them and using sage can sometimes invite others and even worse things into the home. He used some other type of stuff to cleanse the home, and we then made this bath for my partner, and he was to sit in the bath with all the lights out for 30 minutes and not get out. I told him that I would do it another day for myself, as I didn't want to alarm him, and he did the bath and things were actually cool for a few weeks. But eventually, everything just started up again. I remember being at a wedding with a friend and my partner called me on the phone, just hysterical, and he said that some of the dishes in our kitchen just started falling to the ground and that he was really scared. I left the wedding early to be with him, and that night was the night that we decided to break our lease and just get the hell out of there. In 2 weeks, we had a new apartment and paid a lot of money to get out of our lease. The landlord worked with us, and she also provided me with the information of the previous tenants. I told her the honest truth, and she didn't believe me, though. I actually talked to the previous tenants on the phone as well, and they were also a young couple, and the girl shared that she too would often hear the footsteps, see the door slam, and would always feel just on edge. However, it didn't escalate for them, and they lived there for about 16 months, and it was so comforting to actually receive some validation that I just kind of sighed in relief. A crazy side note too is the first day in our new apartment, a pipe busted and it was shooting water just on everything. It happened at 3 a.m. and we were really scared that something followed us. After the pipe though, nothing ever happened again, but we were still haunted by those memories, and my partner never questions my intuition now, and he even asks me, how do you feel in this space? Which is kind of funny, to be honest. He's actually like a real believer now, in fact. Now, so many other things happen in that place, like my boyfriend seeing a kid in the bathroom, flickering lights, intense cold spots, and the constant feeling that something is just standing right next to you. And I'm honestly happy to just finally share this story. I have told a few friends, and all but one do not believe me. One even laughed while I was telling her, and I just stopped telling the story to people because, well, I felt like I was inviting negative energy back, and people just never believed me. So, if you've listened this long, thank you for actually hearing me out. Oh, and as for the kid, this is honestly the scariest thing that he ever experienced. I didn't give it as much attention as I probably should have, but the bathroom was just a creepy place in the house. But when you would go in there, the lights would just randomly flicker, and I always let that go because the lights can easily be explained, right? And it may have just been an electrical thing, who knows. But the door to the bathroom was right at the top of the staircase landing, and when you walk into the bathroom there's this huge mirror. This means that when you look in the mirror, you can see the stairs behind you. Now, I always close the door because, well, I'm a chicken, but my boyfriend would often leave it open to just brush his teeth or do his hair and whatnot. Now one day, we were getting ready to go out at night, and I heard my boyfriend yelling my name. I went to him and he said, "Oh my gosh, I just saw this kid smiling at me in the mirror." I was like, "I believe you, but it's gone now. Are you okay?" And he said, "Let me show you." And he walked down the staircase, and the stairs had this kind of bend in it where you would turn, and he said the kid was leaning over the curve and just smiling at me. He was shaking and really scared, and he was like, "I don't want to see them anymore," and we ended up leaving to see friends after that. That was the first night, too, that I told my friend Jennifer about it. It helped us a lot to talk to a friend, and she's my only friend that actually believes us. Jennifer's always been awesome, and it's always made my partner feel more supported to have her. And these days, I'm legit not allowed to bring up the kid story to him, and I sometimes wonder if he saw more and just never told me. This was around the time that I was 11 years old. My dad had just bought a log cabin in the woods of Maine, and the place was just completely dead. And while we had neighbours, we just rarely saw them. We had already spent a few nights up there in previous trips, about a 250-mile trip just to get there, and we decided to take another trip up there for a long weekend. As this cabin was old, my parents decided to get work done on it to make sure that it would be more appealing. So they hired people to come and redo stuff in the rooms, and at the time there was only one bedroom available for us to sleep in. As night fell, we all got ready to go to sleep. There were 6 of us in one room: Mum, Dad, me, 2 brothers and sister. And in the middle of the night, I wake up to audibly clear boot steps in the living room. The bedroom was connected to the living room. All that was between us and the living room was an old wood door and rusty deadbolt lock that would definitely come off if somebody were to kick the door. As I was waking up, I was in a foggy state, as most people are, and then I heard the voice of my sister saying, "Do you hear that?" So now I know this isn't part of my dream and that this was real. I sit up quickly and look to the other bed, and both my parents and my sister are looking at the door and looking at each other. My heart starts to race, not knowing what to think, and I then hear my sister say, "We're going to die," which really doesn't help the situation at hand. As my other brother starts waking up, the boot steps stop for a moment, then continue. Mind you, there was no fading of the steps, which means that the sound came from a general area. We continue to just look at each other in fear and worry, none of us knowing how or why somebody got into our cabin. As my last brother begins to wake up, the boot steps just stop. My dad then gets out of bed and grabs the machete he placed under the bed and heads towards the door, placing his ear on the door slowly to try and see if he can hear anything else. In one quick motion, he unlocks and opens the door while yielding his weapon, prepared for anybody. He walks out into the living room, then to the other rooms to check if everything was clear, and it was. And as a matter of fact, all the doors and the windows were still locked, and there was no possible entry into the cabin, seeing as nothing was tampered with. It was hard to get back to sleep that night, but as I woke up that morning, I remember what happened that previous night, remembering those clear boot steps, and I even confirmed with my family that it wasn't a dream and that we all experienced the same thing. As there was no possible way a person could have entered the house, I came to the conclusion that it must have been something paranormal. Me and my family have tried to debunk this, but can't come up with a solid solution, so if you think you have a reasonable cause for this incident, please let me know. And no, I know for a fact that the boot steps came from inside the house. And this was definitely one of my scariest experiences in my life. So, before I begin, please note that this was really hard to write, and at many times sharing this, I just had overwhelming flashbacks. So, please forgive me if it sounds a little bit jumbled, and I tried my best to do it all right and edit it correctly. So for context, my dad grew up with this man named Bruce and considered him one of his best friends. Bruce was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in his late teens, and my dad, being the kind and caring soul that he is, stepped in to be his guardian. I say that lightly, though. I mean, he's always helped out when Bruce was going through an episode, as M's parents were MIA. Growing up, Bruce was always around, and I saw him as another father figure in my life. He lived in a small town 2 hours from my city, where we also had a holiday home, so he was constantly coming up to stay at ours, and he was kind and calm and patient, and also an amazing artist. Almost yearly, though, Bruce went through phases of refusing to take his medication. This then triggered an intense manic episode, some of which I've witnessed, and they're frightening to see for a young child who only knew this person as quiet and calm. He would do things and say things far beyond his control and couldn't quite grasp reality. And that's unfortunately where it begins. I was 12 when this happened, so it was around 10 years ago, but it still feels so fresh in my mind. So every summer, my family and I would take a trip down to our beach house, Bruce's Town. Our little house was a one-room unit, where us kids would usually sleep in the lounge, but for Christmas, our parents bought a massive 3-person tent for us to sleep in the front lawn. So, while my parents slept in the house, we got the tent. A week before my dad had to drive back up for work, he got a strange call from Bruce. Although at the time I didn't know what it was about, I could see the concerned look on my dad's face as he told Bruce, "No, I won't do that." After further arguing, my dad hung up and murmured to my mum about something. "I'll sort something out," my dad said, and then he left. I asked what was wrong because my mum's expression turned into worry. She shrugged it off though and told me not to worry and that was that. Later that night, I heard from my mum talking to my auntie that Bruce is refusing to take his medication unless my dad withdraws money. From what I know, my dad is in charge of Bruce's finances and his bank account because Bruce has a meth problem or something. Bruce has a son who's trying to stay clean from it, and after Bruce tried and failed to get his son to buy him some meth, he turned to my dad, who also refused. I totally get it. He's an adult and can make his own choices, but my dad didn't want to enable his drug problem, right? My dad stepped in to be a guardian of Bruce, so that was his job. And this is where everything goes sour. Bruce started threatening to stop taking his medication ever again, and that he hadn't been for weeks. He then started threatening to harm my brothers and me. He said to my parents, "They trust me, it would be easy." My mum freaks out and tells him that she's calling the police on him. The police arrived at his house to see that the whole property was empty. He had fled and was hiding somewhere, which made everyone really uneasy. Nothing really happened in the next coming weeks, and it was time for my dad to drive back up to the city for work. Mum felt okay staying down with us, and of course, the 3 kids were just oblivious to all the commotion that was going on, and so we were too. Everything is good for the first few nights with Dad gone, and then it starts going downhill pretty quickly. So it's around 3:30 a.m. My brothers and I are sound asleep in the tent. My mum is in the house. She too is fast asleep when she wakes up to a bombing of texts from Bruce. They're all blank, but since this is the first time hearing from Bruce since he threatened her kids, my mum is wide awake in full-blown panic mode. Bruce then rings her, and as she answers, he doesn't reply, and instead he just breathes heavily on the phone for 10 seconds before hanging up. The second time is the same. Mum asks where he is, but is hung up on. He rings the third time saying, "Back deck," before just hanging up. My mum hears a loud bang from the back of the house and quickly calls the police. The only way to the back is going through the front lawn where my brothers and I were sleeping, and I don't remember much except being shaken awake by my dad's best friend, who my mum called in tears, and coming into the house to see 3 police officers standing around. My brothers and I were wide awake now because we were curious as everything was going on in the house. And then this happened. My dad came back down for us with the news that Bruce's son had come up to him in the city to apologize and confess that he was told to come to murder our whole family in exchange for a large sum of money. My dad was in shock and rushed back down, and Bruce was back in hiding again. My mum let everyone who knew him and was close to him know what happened, and if he did come to them, that they were to let the police know, who will immediately detain him as he was considered dangerous and mentally unstable. The most terrible thing about this whole situation, though, was that one of her supposed best friends who knew him let him stay at hers instead of calling authorities. On a side note too, they have only started talking again recently after Mum forgave her. But as the summer starts to wind down, we return to the city to find a few terrifying things. My mum and dad come home to one of their bathroom windows smashed and dirty footprints just everywhere. For some reason, nothing out of the ordinary had happened until my older brother, an avid cockatiel lover, went out to check out our aviary birds and find that they were all missing. not one of them was in there, and we assumed that they must have escaped and flown away, until Dad got a nasty surprise opening our barbecue to see all 10 of them had been cooked alive. My parents can't prove it was him, but after all that had happened in regard to Bruce, it probably was, especially after finding out what Mum's friend did. To make matters worse, though, our neighbour heard and saw what was going on when we were broken into, but didn't bother to ring the police or even let us know, and my parents were pissed. She made some sort of awful excuse about being home alone and never having witnessed something like this, but it was pretty petty. Anyway, the whole situation was just terribly frightening, and I've spent my whole life just trying to move on from it. I've never seen a ghost, still haven't, but this is probably the closest, I think, that I've ever been to a true paranormal experience. This occurred in Tennessee in summer of 2006. My wife was working nights at a hospital, and we were living in a remodeled house on a small farm. We didn't do any farming at all, minus some peach trees in the backyard, but had a small pond and leased the acreage for cattle. It's not really that important, but I'm just trying to convey that this is an actual event and not something made up. So, I was sitting in our office on the computer one night, uploading resumes and probably looking at naughty websites. I honestly don't recall, but it was a very typical night by most standards. Around midnight, best I can remember, I got this distinct feeling that someone had walked into the room, and then I felt a warm hand gently rest itself on the back of my neck. It didn't even register initially that it was out of place until I remembered that my wife was at work 35 miles away and I would have seen her walk in. We lived alone too, no kids either. I kind of froze, halfway expecting that I was about to be robbed. I slowly turned my chair around to an empty room. And at this point, my hair was just standing on end. And then my guitar, which was in its case, strummed itself twice, loudly. I never really understood the term frozen with fear until that very moment. And I did the only sensible thing that I could think of. I ran into my backyard and spent a surprisingly restful night in a hammock. Years later, when I tell that story to friends who knew me then, several of them have independently relayed to me that they always had an uneasy feeling while in that house, but didn't want to scare us. We lived there for 4 years and nothing else ever really happened. Except a picture falling off a wall one night around 2 a.m, but the wire had broken on it, so that doesn't really count. And that's my story. It's 100% true, and I can assure you, completely unembellished. So I met Herb Baumeister, who killed 12 to 20 men. I met him at a straight friendly gay bar near my house in 1995, the now defunct Varsity Lounge. The Varsity is one of the bars where he almost certainly met his victims. I was a regular there as it was a very nice dive bar just half a block from my apartment, my last years in college. The Varsity is an older man's gay bar mostly that was also popular amongst both gay and straight students at Heron's School of Art. Definitely not a typical pickup place, and I showed up about 15 minutes before my girlfriend had reserved a booth for us. Now, I remember that he was far more aggressive than the average Varsity patron. When I walked in, he immediately made sure to catch my eye and smiled and waved. When I sat down in our booth, he joined me uninvited and introduced himself as Herb. I let him know that I was straight and my girlfriend was on the way, and I'm pretty sure that he didn't believe me, but he didn't stick around after I refused his invite to go to his house party. His face got angry for a second, like a flash of fury, and then he went back to acting and playing his role and just went away. A year later, his wife turned him in basically, and they started finding skeletons in his backyard. And while I was never in danger, it was still creepy as hell to find this out. I wish I had more salacious details to add, but I just don't. I had no trouble recognizing him when it hit the news, though, as the encounter was just so unusual, and I don't know anyone else with the name Herb. I was always a little bit scared in my house growing up. Recently, my sister and I were talking, and it turns out that I wasn't alone either. We both experienced just strange happenings, but never said anything to each other. We had no real reason to think that there was a ghost, and there had been no deaths in the home, and we were only the second family to live in it, but still, things were weird. When we were home by ourselves, we would hear cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen, and one day she was taking a bath and heard a scratch on the door. When our younger sister was around 2, she would have dreams of people that were dead. It started as happy sightings, being visited by her great-grandmother who is no longer alive, and it seemed like a miracle because she was seeing angels. But as she got older, it turned to nightmares and a severe fear of sleeping in the room. So bad, in fact, that she slept with our mum and stepdad for 8 years. Her bedroom always creeped us out too, and no one has slept in it for close to 15 years now. My sister and I shared a room, and on several separate occasions, we saw a dark figure run across the room. I actually remember laying in bed and feeling it sink in like someone sat down to the point that I rolled. I also saw a little girl that would vanish as soon as I started trying to figure out what I was seeing. But the attic was the absolute worst part of the house, bar none, and you had to walk by the stairs to get out to our mum's attached beauty salon. I felt so much dread walking by those stairs and never ever looked up them because I just knew if I did that there would be something terrible there. And my sister, she felt the exact same way. My sister also told me about her nightmares that she had in the house, but she doesn't have them any longer. She said, so I would have very vivid dreams with my sleep paralysis. Sometimes I would see myself in the middle of our room with all the lights off, and I was possessed by a demon, and I talked in a weird voice. Then I would feel tingling in all of my body and through my head, and as this was happening, the first thought was that I was being attacked by a demon. I would instantly start to pray, and the tingling would just get worse. I would ask God to banish whatever it is attacking me, and all at once I would feel the tingling go through my body, out my head, and it was gone. And I would feel an overwhelming sense of peace. I would have dreams like that multiple times, and I would always pray, and it always went away the same, always tingling. We also watched as our mother got sicker and sicker, drug abuse, and more abusive. When we first moved in, she was a good mum, and everything was fine. Her and our stepdad fought occasionally, but nothing too crazy. But the longer we lived in that house, though, the worse it got. And now it's just completely out of hand. I think it's also important to mention that all of our animals have died very young and always suddenly there too. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I do think that there's something fishy going on with this house. I wanted to share this to try and get some advice because I'm personally not allowed to go in the house anymore, but my sister can, and I don't know, maybe she can do something. I worked at Six Flags last spring and summer, and well, technically, a freelance arts company leasing vending spots there, but I was one of the oldest people hired. I was 18 at the time, attending college, while most of my co-workers were in high school. I took photos in a sort of old-timey dress-up shop. It was honestly one of the most fun jobs I'd ever had. I was hired back in March of 2018 and started work in April, when the park was open on weekends, only before the official opening. I'd been working there for about a month, and the park was now open during the week for less than 10 hours per day, so I was able to work all day, but was unfortunately the only one in the shop as college was on summer break and high school was still in session until mid-June. And you can probably see where this story is going. So I was alone all day during the week and had some co-workers on the weekends. I was so terribly alone during the day that I'd walk across the path to go see my other co-worker out of boredom. But when I was outside of my shop during the day, I began to notice a man hanging around my area. I'd mainly see him walk by very slowly, staring at me, and I presumed my shop the whole time. I figured he was just shy, wanting a picture inside, and was too afraid or socially awkward to ask for pricing. Deep down, though, he did give me an uneasy feeling, but I decided to ignore it because he was a customer in the park and was probably just very antisocial. I kept a smile, though, and I tried pulling in customers all day every day. But one day I smiled and waved at him, and that was a very big mistake. He walked over briskly to stand in front of me and stare at me, and I was really creeped out by this. I was scared, but he then asked about prices, after days of walking by me and staring, mind you, and I breathed a sigh of relief and started going through my memorized sales pitches. After I finished, he started to smile. Not a normal smile, mind you, but one that made my skin crawl. He leaned in so close that I could smell his breath. He asked how much it would be for him, and I was confused. I'd just gone through my price list, so I stated that prices were set and non-negotiable unless you were an art company employee or a park employee or something. And at this, he just kind of shrugged and walked off. When I ran through my pitch, a family had grown interested and wanted some pictures, so I gladly took them into the shop and had a wonderful time photographing them. While I was checking the family out and collecting payment, I looked up and the man was back, leaning against the chain barrier in front of my shop. The family collected their things and walked to the chain. The man had to move to the side for me to open it for them, and I immediately closed it behind them as he tried pushing his way into the shop. I told him that I was sorry, but only paying customers could come in, and he wasn't allowed in unless he was considering a purchase. And at this, he frowned and walked away again. I waited a few minutes, and I tidied up the shop and stepped back outside. It was almost closing time, so it was pointless, but I had to stand outside or else I'd get in trouble with my boss. And I noticed him one last time that day. Across the way from me was a game, and I saw him hiding behind it, peeking his head out and just looking at me. And I can't tell you just how scared I was because I honestly just wanted to cry. But he continued to do this for the entire week, and I eventually just began to ignore him, which he did not like one bit. On that Friday, as soon as the park opened, he made a beeline towards me. I was out front organising outdoor props, and I froze. I hastily dropped what I was doing and just went inside, closing the chain behind me. He paced back and forth in front of the chain, muttering to himself and just kind of looking at me, and I was terrified at this point. I was going to run to the phone to call security if he didn't leave, and he suddenly lurched forward, grabbing the chain in both of his hands, and I'll never forget this moment because my heart dropped and my blood just ran cold. His eyes were just wild, and that same menacing grin was back. And then he started whispering about things that he wanted me to do to him, and it was disgusting and not worth repeating. But he was talking about how he loved me and all these sexual things that he wanted to do to me. He wanted to put me into a dress and said that he wanted me to humiliate him in front of all the people in the park. I was slowly backing up to the wall in my shop as he started yelling and laughing at this point. I told him to go away, that I would call security if he didn't leave me right away, but he got even more angry and said something that keeps me up at night, even a year later. He said, "I'll be waiting for you when you get out. Meet me by the employee exit on your way out, or else." He gave me that disgusting smile again and then just walked away. I went behind the counter and I just started sobbing, and I never imagined I'd have something like this happen to me. And now that it had, all of my knowledge of what to do just went out the window. And I'm ashamed to say that I honestly just cried like a little girl. I decided to tell my manager at the end of the day because I didn't want to be afraid of coming to work. When I told him, he was mortified that I hadn't told him sooner. He walked me to a secret exit to the employee parking lot so I wouldn't see the man, and the next morning we went to the security office and I gave a description to all the park security of what he looked like and what he normally would wear. I went back to my shop with 2 co-workers, and not even 5 minutes later, here he came, strolling over with an angry look on his face. I hadn't met him the day before, and boy, was he furious. My co-workers noticed my panic as I ran and hid in the back. I hadn't told them about my situation yet, and when I did, they told me that they wouldn't leave me alone ever after their shift was over. I called security and told them what he was wearing, and so they updated the information, and they posted a security officer outside of my shop. He seemed to disappear because of that, and when the officer left to take care of something, he just came straight back. Security soon realized that every time a clothed officer was around, he would hide, so they posted a plainclothes officer across my shop posing as a customer. In other words, I was being used as a bait, ultimately, but I felt it was important to get him out of the park, so I complied. Security eventually apprehended him later that day as he was headed towards my shop. They asked me for identification on him, and I remember breaking down and just sobbing. But the officer comforted me, and finally this nightmare was over, though. He never physically threatened me or wielded a weapon or anything, but he was doing enough verbal threats to make me fear for my life. But they banned him from all Six Flag parks around the country, revoked his membership status, and took him into custody. Unfortunately, as there was no violence committed, they had to let him go, though. As I drove home that night, I saw him walking on the side of the road, and I immediately sped away in fear that he would see me through the window and chase me or something. But at least he couldn't get me at work anymore, right? I found out a couple of weeks later from one of my security friends that he saw my stalker being arrested in a town over. I went and looked up arrest records for that town later in the day and saw that he'd been arrested for indecent exposure, public endangerment, and public intoxication. All I can say in the end is that I'm glad that he was arrested, and you really don't think something like this will happen to you until it just does. So please, everyone, always be careful about who's around you at all times, and always be cautious. This story happened 7 years ago, but it feels like it was just yesterday. But July 20th of 2012 was when it happened. It started out as a pretty normal day, if I'm being honest. I was a patient tech at a dialysis clinic in rural Alabama and up way early to open the clinic. First thing I saw after shutting off my alarm at 2:45 a.m. was a text message from my cousin Taylor, who lives in CO but not Aurora, saying, "You're going to see the news about a shooting in CO, but Meg and I are safe." Naturally, I flip on the TV, soaking up the horror while throwing on my scrubs and getting angry at mankind. Great start to a Friday, right? Well, I pull up to my clinic and notice that the nurse that opens with me isn't there yet. No biggie though, because I'm a little early, so I grab my bag and I head in to get started. I finish up my prep work in the water room. You have to do all sorts of testing on the water used in dialysis patients, and I go out on the treatment floor and no nurse still. The clinical manager walks in about that time and says, "Where's the nurse?" To which I replied, "I have no idea. I'll call her." After trying her house and cell without getting an answer, I'm getting a little peeved. This particular nurse was picking up night shifts at the nursing home and just had a bad habit of oversleeping. My CM says, "Why don't you drive by her place," which was one street over from the clinic, "and check to see if she's even there?" Now, before anyone says, "Why didn't she go?" let me explain something. It was almost time for the patients to come in, but a nurse has to be in the building in order to even let them in the lobby. My CM was a nurse and could at least let everyone in while we figured out what nurse's deal was. Anyway, I agreed to ride because it's literally a stone's throw away and because I saw her car was there and I was going to lay on the horn until she just got up. I pull up to her house and she's there, so I deploy my "I'm honking mad" tactic until she pokes her head out of the door apologizing and swearing that she'll be at the clinic in 5 minutes. Cool. So I head back to the clinic, park in the still empty parking lot, and start to get out of my car. In the time that it took me to open my door and stand up and turn around, there's this guy right inside my door blocking my way going, "Where's your bag?" And I'm honestly so confused. I thought he was a patient's spouse or son or friend initially, and I say, "It's inside. Why?" I started to move forward and quickly realized, though, that there's a knife poking me in the chest. We never worry about thieves or druggies because, well, our clinic has no narcotics and nothing to steal unless you're into 10-inch TVs that might or might not have gotten puked or bled on or something. I know only a second or two went by, but it felt like eons, and I remember my ears started ringing and my dad's voice saying, if you get cornered by someone, scream obscenities, to shock them. I don't know, he was probably just being sarcastic. But then hit him as hard as you can, and then run. My chest just felt like it was on fire. I mean, why me? And why today? Why'd that guy shoot up a theater, and what's wrong with people? Next thing I know, I'm screaming obscenities, and I slammed my right hand under his knife while swinging a wild uppercut with my left wrist. And I hit him right in the kisser, and he drops the knife and immediately starts backpedaling. I'm yelling after him, and he's grabbing his face while breaking into a run, and I watch him dash out the back of the lot, and it hits me. The adrenaline rush was over now, and I'm beating on the clinic door because my hands are shaking too bad to get my key in the lock. CM lets me in, and right before the door shuts, I see the nurse pull up, and I'm kind of yelling what happened. Ears are still ringing, and CM is freaking out and calling 911. Then I look at my hands. My right palm is cut, and the 3 knuckles on my left are split. The nurse is inside now, and I'm trying not to throttle her, and I know it wasn't exactly her fault, but I'm just going to blame it on the nerves. Cops show up, get the rundown, and insist on taking me to the ER because A, I might need stitches, and B, I'm not hysterical, so they think I'm in shock. I didn't need stitches, I just got some sort of medical superglue, but I had to get a tetanus shot because, to quote the doc, the human mouth is a cesspit of bacteria and filth. Awesome. Very uplifting, right? Now, for some actual uplifting information, though, I had given a pretty decent description of the dude, and because I'd landed a decent blow to the face, the officers thought that it wouldn't be hard to find him. And guess what? They didn't have to look. An officer was sitting in the parking lot of the clinic when he sees a guy matching the description walking through looking under cars. The cop is not in an unmarked squad car and thinks, surely no one is that dumb. But, lo and behold, when he gets closer, the guy has a busted upper lip. And apparently, this guy was trying to find the knife that he dropped and maybe a Darwin Award or something. Officer Friendly brings him in for questioning, and it turns out this upstanding fellow has been in and out of prison quite a bit. He admits to everything, well, except that a 5'4", 150-pound lady got the drop on him, and pleads guilty. He was actually given a heavy sentence because of his lengthy criminal history, and, the poorly attempted armed robbery and all. I don't remember when he'll be getting out, but I really hope that I never see that guy again. So, this is going to be a long story because, well, I've experienced so much, and what I'm sharing here isn't even all of it. Hopefully, though, you'll find it's worth the listen. So, in 1996, when I was 18 years old, my boyfriend ended his own life. His name was Mike, and he was 19 years old. We were together for about 2 years. Before he died, I didn't really have much of an opinion on ghosts. I loved ghost stories and watched unsolved mysteries even, but couldn't really say if I believed or not. I've always just been a bit of a skeptic. But when it comes to this kind of stuff, I needed to see it with my own eyes before offering an opinion. I'm not religious, I don't believe in heaven or hell and all that stuff, but after everything I've seen and everything I've experienced, I have no doubt in my mind that there is some kind of life after death. I don't know how it works or where we go or even what it's like. My theories are based almost solely on what I've seen and experienced myself. I didn't even start reading up on this stuff until it was already happening to me and I was trying to make sense of it. But my experiences happened over the course of about 2 years, I'd say. It only stopped, I believe, because I asked him to stop, and he would do something to let me know that he was there at least a couple of times a week, and as much as I didn't want to lose him, I knew in order for me to continue on with my life and heal, I needed him to stop. So one night I went to a spot that we liked to go to and told him, hoping that he could hear me, that I needed him to stop, and why too. And after that I didn't hear from him again for about 5 years. If you want to hear about why and how he came back, I can get to that later if people feel like reading it. For now, though, I'm just going to talk about some of the biggest things that he did to let me know that he was still around. So get comfy because this is going to be a bit of a long one. So the first thing that happened was maybe 2 or 3 days after he died. This isn't really a big one, but it was the first thing that happened, so I thought I'd mention it. So I had a cold glass of soda that I'd forgotten about on the kitchen table. It was full of ice, so it was covered in condensation, making a ring on the table under it. I was around the corner cooking something on the stove, and I heard a noise. It sounded like something hitting the table, and then the sound of something sliding and scraping. I looked around the corner at the table, and the glass had moved about a foot to the left of where it had been sitting. I could tell because there was a water trail of condensation left behind. And I knew immediately that that was the sliding or scraping sound that I had heard. At the time, I think I thought it was just weird, and I didn't attribute it to anything or even him. But the first time I thought it was him was maybe a day or two later. So it was dark, and I was walking home from my best friend's house. The streets were lined with big trees, and the streetlights cast shadows of the trees down onto the sidewalk. I could see my own shadow too as I walked, and I was staring down at the sidewalk, lost in thought, when I suddenly noticed the shadow of another person right next to mine. It shocked me and made me look around, and I fully expected to find another person had walked up to me while I wasn't paying attention, but when I turned, there was no one else there. I looked back down at the other shadow, which was still there, and looked around again, but I was definitely alone. I kept walking, and the shadow followed me, and it disappeared from time to time as the lights were blocked by the trees, but it would always come back. I was creeped out for sure, but mostly just really confused until I reached the end of the block next to my house and stopped. I was just standing there thinking when I felt someone blow on the back of my neck. Mike used to do this all the time, and I wore my hair in a ponytail a lot, and he used to sneak up behind me and blow on the back of my neck to make me shiver and give me goosebumps. And that's exactly what this felt like. It was such a familiar gesture that I recognized it immediately, and that was when I thought that it was him. And that was just the beginning. Over the next couple of years, just so many things happened that I could never doubt the existence of spirits again. Things that happened right in front of my eyes and in front of other people even. While some of them could possibly be explained away by someone who doesn't believe, too many of them are just too crazy for it to be anything else. There was a time that I actually saw him too. It was a couple of weeks after he died, and I was watching TV in the living room. All the lights were off, so the only light came from the glow of the television. Now, I wasn't expecting it at all, so I was really shocked when I looked up and I saw him standing across from me next to my mum's recliner. Well, what really stood out to me, though, was the shirt that he was wearing. It was a shirt that I hadn't seen him wear since we were in 9th grade. I'd forgotten all about it, but I recognized it as soon as I saw it because it had so many bright colors on it. Back then, I had called it his clown shirt because the sleeves had big stripes of blue and red and orange, but the rest of the shirt was yellow. And now I could see that same shirt, the yellow with the stripes of color on his arms. I could see his head and his shoulders, and the only things that weren't clear were his face and his legs. He had dark brown hair, and he wore it cut really short. I could see his dark hair across his forehead, but the details of his face just weren't clear. Before I could really study him, though, and just as suddenly as he appeared, he was just gone. Why that shirt, though, I wondered. I'd only seen him wear it once, and everyone teased him because it was so ugly, and he never wore it again. The only reason that I could think that he would pick that shirt when he showed himself was because he wanted to make sure that he would get my attention. And if that's why, it definitely worked. The colors on the shirt were definitely the first thing that caught my eye. So, some other things happened too. I had this glass angel figurine, and it was pretty big, at least 9 or 10 inches tall and very heavy, and I bought it after Mike died, and I set it on the right-hand side of my bedroom dresser. One day, I came home, and it was on the left-hand side of the dresser. I would move it back, and then I would come home and find it moved again. I asked my mum about it, but she insisted that she didn't do it, and I don't believe that she actually did. And this happened at least a half a dozen times, too. So, I'm going to jump ahead a bit here a little because it's relevant, but when I eventually moved into my own apartment, I had already experienced almost 2 years of Mike doing all kinds of things to let me know that he was still around when, one morning, my roommate thanked me for blowing out her candles the night before. She slept on a mattress on the floor, and it turns out that she had stupidly taken to lighting candles and sitting them on the floor by her mattress and blankets. That night, she had fallen asleep with them still lit, but when she woke up in the morning, they were out. She figured that I'd blown them out because they hadn't melted down at all, and I told her that I didn't. She didn't believe me. She asked who else could have done it, so I told her. I was taking a chance here that she would think that I was nuts, but she didn't. She asked me if that was why my room was always so cold, and I hadn't noticed that. But then again, I'm more comfortable with cold, so I wouldn't have had a problem with it. She told me she always thought it was weird that even though my room was at the front of the house where I got all the light, especially no curtains, that it was always so cold in there. She asked me about what else he had done, and I told her about how he would move my glass angel. She wanted to test it, so we went to my room and I said out loud, "If you're here, she wants proof. Could you move my angel again so I don't look like an idiot?" We laughed and then went downstairs for a while, and I look back now and think that I should have stayed to watch, but at the time, finding it moved was something that only ever happened when I came home from somewhere, so I guess I thought that we should just leave. We waited about half an hour and then went back up to look, and my roommate screamed when we got there and found the angel moved almost to the opposite side of the dresser. And yes, we were definitely the only ones home. So, back to only a few weeks or months after he died. My best friend was over and I was telling her about how I saw him and some of the other things that he had done. We were standing in the kitchen and I was wearing a big baggy t-shirt. It was really too big for me, so it was extremely noticeable when I felt a couple of really hard tugs in the back of my shirt. The pull was so strong that it pulled my shirt up tight against my throat, choking me. My friend saw it happen and freaked out, jumping away from me. The tugging stopped and I pulled my shirt down again, but as soon as I did, he grabbed the back of my shirt again and pulled hard enough that it choked me again. I was laughing, but my friend was freaking out, and it took her a minute to calm down, and I told her that it was okay, it was just him. My parents were away, so my friend and I slept in their bed that night. The next morning, we were laying in bed just talking about him and the different things that he'd done when my friend decides to test him. She said out loud, "If you're here, turn the ceiling fan on." She knew that the only way to turn the ceiling fan on was with a remote that was velcroed to the headboard above our heads. And a few seconds later, the ceiling fan above us starts to spin. We started laughing, so I say, "Make it go faster," and it did. It started spinning faster and faster until it was going as fast as it could go, and then my friend said, "Okay, stop, and make it spin in the other direction." We laid there and watched as the fan started to slow down until it came to a complete stop, and then watched as it began to spin again in the opposite direction. We laughed and said, "Okay, that's enough, it's too cold," and watched as the fan once again came to a stop. I got up to go into the bathroom, and a few minutes later I hear my friend shriek. I ran back to see what happened, and she said that she was sitting there and suddenly the tissue box had flown off the end of the table next to her. She pointed at it, now laying on the floor in the middle of the room, and I wasn't really surprised because he'd done stuff like that before, pushing tissue boxes and remote controls, other things like that, onto the floor right in front of me. The house I grew up in had very creaky stairs too, and you could hear every step someone took coming up those stairs. My bedroom was directly across from them, so normally when the person reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the hallway, I could see them if my door was open. And well, I started hearing people come up the stairs, but when the footfalls reached the top, there would be no one there. A couple of times my bedroom door would be closed and I'd hear the footsteps coming up the stairs, and there'd be a knock on my door and I'd say yeah and expect the door to open, but it just wouldn't. Then another knock, and thinking it was my mum and that she just didn't hear me, I'd say it louder. But still, no one opened the door. So I got up to check, and there would be no one there. The first time it happened, I looked in the other rooms to see if someone was in them, but no one was. So I went to the stairs and called downstairs to my mum. and when she answered, she said that she was in the kitchen, and we were the only people in the house. This would happen a lot, and I just started saying come in, knowing the door wouldn't open. Another time, I was in the downstairs bathroom. It was the middle of the night, so my parents were upstairs sleeping, and I was finishing up my business when I heard a sharp knock on the door and someone say, "Hurry up." I thought it was my mum. She hated when I stayed up late and would come downstairs to yell at me to go to bed. But when I opened the door, I totally expected to see my mum standing there glaring at me, but she wasn't though. There was no one there again. There was one time I was home alone, and this happened a lot. My parents had a huge motorhome that they travelled in, and I was 18, and having always been a good girl, wink wink, they let me stay home by myself. Sometimes just for the weekend, and sometimes for a week or more at a time too. So, it was the middle of the day, and I was just sitting in the living room watching TV when the stereo suddenly turned on by itself. It was loud, like really loud, and it honestly scared me half to death, and I jumped up to turn it down and then off again. I thought it was him, so I said, "Don't do that, you scared me," and went back to the couch. Right when I got seated again, the stereo turned on again, full blast, like I hadn't turned it down before. I screamed and said, "Stop it," and turned it off again. Another night, I was up late watching TV in the living room, and it was turned down low, though, because I didn't want to wake my parents, when all of a sudden I heard a noise from the kitchen that it sounded like water running. I muted the TV and listened, and sure enough, it sounded like someone was running water in the kitchen sink. I walked into the kitchen, which was shaped like an L, with the sink around the corner on the short end of the L, and the whole way there I could hear it clearly. But just as I turned the corner to get a look, it stopped. So I check in the sink, and it was wet, like the water had been running. I go back to the living room and sit down, and that's when the water starts running again. I figured, what the hell, but got up again, of course, and right before I turned that corner, it stopped again. At this point, I'm getting a little bit irritated and a little bit creeped out, so I go back into the living room and I sit back down, and when the water started running again a third time, I said out loud, "I'm not getting up again." And at this point, the water stopped. Anyway, that's enough for now, but I have plenty more to tell, so if you guys want to hear more, let me know in the comment section below.